Good morning, everyone. This is the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. I am happy that you all are with me this morning, wherever you are across the world, under the sound of this voice. You could be anywhere, but you are here. And I appreciate the fact that you are. I hate to tell you this, but we are at war, a global, undeclared, unacknowledged war. And that war is being fought on multiple levels: industrial, economic, military, and for that matter, a war of the mind. Meaning, this ability or attempt to try to control your point of view by dropping context, or for that matter, just lying outright. And you can see this in multiple conflicts that are popping off that seem isolated, but the source is effectively the same: us. We, in this feeling of losing power. And it's not really a feeling, they are right. The powers that be, the people who, for the most part, have this hegemonic control of the globe, is losing that hegemonic control of the globe, and their awareness of the fact that they're losing that control of the globe have caused them to freak out, to flail in various places across the globe, various hotspots, whether it would be Georgia, whether it would be Ukraine, or Romania, because they're apparently the Russians are in Romania also, or whether we're talking about North Korea, believe it or not. I'm sorry, South Korea. Because truth be told, there were multiple people that were around that guy. That guy was effectively a puppet of the US. And going into, let's say, the future, it is very possible that we looked at it as it would be far easier to deal with a dictator as opposed to dealing with a country that is more, or at the very least, somewhat of a democracy. Because the reality of it is, we control the South Korean military, they don't. Or, for that matter, Syria. Syria is one of those places where you start to question whether or not you were the good guys, or whether or not you were ever the good guys. Or, if so, when did that change? When you were looking at head choppers being given this very light softball interview from CNN, when you're looking at CNN reporters going through Aleppo that has just fallen and talks about it as if this is some great new revolution that is taking place, despite the fact that these people are literally chopping off heads. Or when you see stories coming out the British media talking about diversity friendly terrorists, or, I'm sorry, diversity friendly jihadists. This is the way it is now being sold. How Syria's diversity friendly jihadists planned on building a new state. That's fantastic. These people are literally ISIS, Al Qaeda, by a different name. And we have gone to changing the name in order to make them seem more friendly and palatable for a Western audience that is seeing places utterly and entirely collapse, people being killed in this terrorist overthrow or attempted overthrow of the Syrian government. CNN had an interview with him, and he pointed out our objective is to overthrow the Syrian government. Full stop. That's what they plan to do. And when you're looking at the machinery, the technology that they have at their disposal, where are they getting this machinery and technology from? Where are they being trained from? Where are they getting protection in regards to staying in Idlib, having the US military protect it while it's there, or for that matter, working with Turkey? It is an astonishing thing when you realize you are not just backing terrorists who are overthrowing the Syrian government, but you're also funding and paying for a genocide that has taken place in Israel. All of these things are connected to one another. The US is funding all of the stuff. Georgia recently invaded one of the NGO sites, and they found all of the stuff, cocktails, Molotov cocktails, equipment, in order to do the damage that they are doing to overthrow the Georgian government. Because again, the fact that Ukraine fell or is losing, they now want to back another horse That horse being Georgia, hoping to open up a second front on Russia. What they feel is real. The world is changing. The world is moving away from them. And because the world is moving away from them, they are doing everything in their power to the point of murder, killing, war, anything else in order to stop that world from going into a new normal. You get the rest of the countries of the world that is sick and tired of this hegemonic control. They're sick and tired of this chaos, sick and tired of this idea that we will intervene into the politics of other nations in order to either overthrow those nations or to put pressure on those nations when those nations are not falling in line with us. The rest of the world is tired of it. We, for the most part, in the US, are kept out of this. Meaning the way our media reports all of these things, it reports it as if these are isolated incidents. Oh, look at that. There are protests in Georgia. Oh, look at that. The Syrian people are very angry and they're protesting by chopping off heads. These pro-democracy, apparently diversity-friendly jihadists, the same people we were fighting and killing a few years prior, and also using, if we're being honest. Because during that time, we tried to call them the Free Syrian or the Democratic Forces or whatever we were calling them at the time when they were being used, once again, to try to overthrow the Syrian government. There are questions that legitimately needs to be asked about how Syria was so unprepared. How on earth could they get to the point of allowing the government to be hit in this particular way? Those questions should legitimately be asked. By the same token, should we be doing this? Should we really be backing full-blown head-chopping jihadists in this particular situation because we are aggravated at the Russians and their sovereignty? And so we decide, well, we want to poke them at a different location because we can't beat them on the border of their own country. To make this even worse, Joe Biden fundamentally lost the election. I'm sorry, Kamala Harris fundamentally lost the election, but she was running with Joe Biden's plan. She had nothing different that she could come up with that she would do. And so from a foreign policy sense, she was keeping Joe Biden's same foreign policy. That policy was put up at the ballot where the public had the ability to decide who they preferred in regards to the foreign policy sense. Donald Trump went pillar to post, whether he was being honest or not. It's secondary to the point. He went pillar and post saying, I'm going to end wars, not start them. And one of those wars that I'm going to end is Joe Biden's war in Ukraine. I am going to end that war. He said it over and over and over again. Every time Donald Trump opened his mouth, he said it over and over and over again, regardless of what his actual intentions are. It's secondary to the point that that is what he told the American audience. That is what the American audience went to vote on. Kamala Harris derided Donald Trump for being willing to sit down in order to bring hostilities down, whether it was in North Korea or, for that matter, even the half-assed job he did in Syria and bringing and killing much of that war while stealing the oil, stealing the wheat. Even in Afghanistan, they derided him for being willing to have a conversation with various people around the world that we don't particularly like, that we call enemies. And yet, when it went to the ballot box, and the American public got to choose, the orthodoxy lost. The American public wasn't interested, even with all of the propaganda that they were indoctrinated with, that they are continuously bombarded with on the issue of an unprovoked war in Ukraine. They still chose Trump. It's a losing war. Hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians are dead for literally no good reason. And Blinken, representing Joe Biden, at least we think he is, because we don't even know if Joe Biden is cognitively there enough to be in control. Blinken comes out in a losing war, no less. Meaning, by all accounts, even Zelensky himself has pointed out we do not have the power to do this, to take over or take territory back. We don't have the capability of doing it. Yeah, New York Times even reported the speed at which the Ukrainian military is losing is only increasing. It is a failed losing war. And yet you get Blinken, who will come out and say this.
For every person, every soldier that Ukraine mobilizes, we're committed to making sure that they have the training and the equipment they need to effectively defend the country. And again, that's what we focused on. Going forward, as I said, Ukraine is on an irreversible path to NATO membership, but we're focused on this in a practical way. We set up a dedicated NATO.
Blinken, in that speech, and it cut off a little bit early, send your kids. Send your kids. Send your kids. And I'm saying kids, but teenagers. Send your teenagers to die in a losing war that is clearly a lost cause. You've lost hundreds, 500,000 human beings are dead for no reason. And Blinken comes out and says, hey, I know that all of these people have been killed. Fair enough. And we're going to send you more weapons, despite the fact that I'm out of a job, literally out of a job and on the way out. But we need you to mobilize your kids to continue to fight and die. That's what we, the United States, need you to do for us. The overwhelming majority of Ukrainians at this point want the war to end. And he is out here still saying, send your kids, send the flower of your youth to go and die. These people are sociopaths. And we, as I pointed out, are in a global war against these sociopaths. I'm going to bring in my guest. I am so happy to have him on the show, to have a conversation about the events that are taking place in Syria. We are joined with Kevork Almasian. I want to make sure I got that right. Excellent. A geopolitical analyst and host of Syriana Analysis. Man, thank you for joining me in this. I really do appreciate you joining me. How are you doing this today?
I'm trying to be being productive in these dire times that we are witnessing nowadays, especially in my country, Syria. So it's a really difficult situation there.
It is deeply disturbing. And when I say we are in a global war against sociopaths, I really mean it. The notion that we would back full-blown terrorists to go into a country and then try to modernize them, basically say that they are diversity-friendly jihadists, or that they are Syrians that just have a disagreement with their government, is outlandish.
Yes.
But that's the way they're trying to sell it here in the United States. CNN just did an interview with the lead terrorist, what is his name, Julani.
Yeah.
And is trying to moderate him as if, well, he just has a disagreement with his government.
Yeah.
It's outrageous.
I would just say this is not new in the U.S. foreign policy approach. The U.S. Foreign policy has been consistent about supporting this type of radical Islamists, let's say, in the Islamic world, just like supporting the neo-Nazis in Ukraine.
Yeah.
For those who don't know, after World War II, the U.S. intelligence and the British intelligence, they hired many neo-Nazi remnants in Ukraine to wage resistant operations against the Soviet Union. But to the support for these radical Islamists, it started basically, or it accelerated in the early 80s when the US decided to arm and equip and train and send multinational terrorists to Afghanistan again against the Soviet Union. This was the first time they have put this policy into practice. And Brzezinski was at the borders with Pakistan, and they were like guiding these jihadists to go to Afghanistan to liberate their country from the Soviet occupation. Now, I think what happened in Afghanistan in the 80s is very little compared to what is happening now in Syria, because the amount of money and weapons that the Americans and their allies have dumped in Syria, it's with tens of billions of dollars. And the Qataris have funneled, they're very rich, and they have funneled tens of billions of dollars to these radical groups. And the reason they wanted to do it, because they wanted to destabilize the country and force Assad to compromise. So first of all, they didn't want like a clear-cut regime change. They wanted to exert pressure on him so that he compromises on major geopolitical files in the region, which basically is about the Arab-Israeli conflict. Because Syria has an instrumental role in the axis of resistance, and it represents the strategic depth of this alliance and also supply chain for Hezbollah, which in turn delivers the weapons and the knowledge, the military knowledge, to the Palestinian factions. So for the Americans, they have to neutralize this threat against Israel. And in order to do that, they have no problem with dealing with these radical Islamists. And you remember after October 7, they have made lots of allegations about Hamas and also Hezbollah, and they called them like genociders. They called them terrorists.
Yeah, they said they were Nazis.
And they said that those are rapists, though they killed decapitated babies, they did this and that. And everything you heard about Hamas and Hezbollah from the mainstream press and the Western officials, those are the same traits that these militant groups who are now marching in Syria. And those are all documented on video, unlike the allegations that we heard about the decapitated babies. Right. Because in Syria, for those who don't know, American funded directly and trained, I'm talking about CIA-funded sectarian Contras, they have decapitated a child in Syria. And this has happened in my city.
Yeah, I can show you the video if you would like to see it. It is gruesome.
Yeah, it is gruesome. I have seen it, and there are examples of eating human organs, and this is also documented on video. So they have created the hell on earth, let's say, in Syria. And now, because al-Julani was the leader of, or the founder of Al-Qaeda offshoot in Syria, during the time of Obama and Clinton, they were the handlers, basically, of al-Julani. But when Trump came to power, he ended the regime change war, which was a covert CIA operation, Timber Sycamore. But the deep state in the US, they wanted to continue the regime change in Syria, so they had to rebrand this al-Nusra Front leader, al-Julani, into a moderate rebel. And this started in 2019, 2020. The American press, PBS, went to Idlib, and he met, one of the journalists met with Julani. This was in 2020 or 2019. And he tried to portray him as just normal, a militant guy who wants for the best for the Syrian people. So the rebranding and polishing Julani has been going on for quite some time. And the Julani, he's a pragmatic person, so they rebranded it into HTS. And he said, I cut my ties with Zawahiri, Al-Qaeda's leader back then, and I want to create an Islamic state in Syria that is only Syrian. We don't want to expand. We don't want to attack our neighboring countries. This is local Islamic state. But now we have moved into a different level of propaganda and different level of rebranding by CNN. Oh, of course, CNN and Julani's handlers are the same. This is a democratic let's say, a war against Syria. This is the Democrats who started this regime change war against Syria, and the CNN is, everybody knows on whose side is in the US. Now they say Julani is a diversity-friendly, and he's going to respect the rights of the Christians and other minorities. But the evidence shows otherwise, because Julani already occupies basically Idlib. And in Idlib, there is no presence for Christians or minorities, and everybody was either ethnically cleansed, killed, or they were forced to leave the city of Idlib. So to assume that Julani has changed, because I watched this interview and he says, you know, people change. When you're in your 20s, you may have a different perspective for life, but when you grow up, you get a little bit older. You know, you mature. You know, like
you get tired of chopping off hits.
Yeah,
like tired of doing that. Yeah,
he wants to do it moderately now. moderate head choppers. This is the reality that we have to live every day in Syria, and unfortunately, we have to swallow all this propaganda and on not only on mainstream media, but also we have now mainstream activists on X, and they are recycling the same propaganda over and over again. But repeating the same lie over and over again doesn't mean that it becomes the truth. But these people who live in abroad 10,000 kilometers away from Syria, they don't give two Fs about the Syrian people. They have their geopolitical fantasies. And if it means that these geopolitical goals can be reached through supporting these radical groups in Syria, let it be, because these people are not going to come and live in Syria, including the so-called Syrian opposition who are in Washington, in Berlin, in Paris, and other Western capitals. They don't, like now Aleppo, they call it liberated. Idlib, they call it liberated. But they don't come and live. But they don't come and live in these places. Why don't they come and live in these places since it is liberated by the Assad dictatorship, right? Why do they prefer to stay in Western governments or in Western countries and not come and participate in building the new liberated, freedom-loving Syria? Because they know they will be sidelined, just like the rest of the Syrian people, because these radical Islamists, they don't believe in democratic rule of law. We have to be honest. If tell me this is like we want to establish an Islamic state in Syria, okay, but be honest with me so I know how to deal with you. But you can't come and tell me now we are diversity friendly and we're Democrats, but at the same time you're trying to establish an Islamic state in this. And I'm not like criticizing Islam itself. We have Islamic states in the region as well. We have in Iran, we have in Saudi Arabia. It's not like they're pretending to be liberal democracies in the region, but be honest. Say we want Islamic State so that the people understand what you want, but you can't sell this project as it's a democracy versus a tyranny, whereas you are building an Islamic State in the country. That's utter hypocrisy.
I want to play this interview, parts of this interview, and I want to get your take on it. I am, man, it is mind-blowing to me that we are okay with this, because I agree with you. Whether it was in South America, where we're using kill squads, whether it's Ukraine, where we're using Nazis, whether it's Syria, whether we're using terrorists, all of these elements are fundamentally dissimilar, meaning using a certain group of extremists in order to go after governments that we don't necessarily like. And the media sanitizes it and sanitize this guy, which is outrageous. I want to play a part of this clip, and I want to get your take on it. This is CNN softballing the interview with Julani. I'm going to start this from the beginning.
Able to do this now.
In recent years, there has been a unification of internal opinions and the establishment of institutional structures within the liberated areas of Syria. This institutionalization included the restructuring within military factions. They entered unified training camps and developed a sense of discipline. This discipline allowed them, with God's guidance, to engage in a battle in an organized manner. The progress and execution of plans have been swift, with clear communication and adherence to commands. They stop where they should stop and withdraw where they should withdraw. The revolution has transitioned from chaos and randomness to a state of order, both in civil and institutional matters and in military operations.
I'm fascinated by that clip. Real quick, I'm fascinated by the clip because what he's effectively saying is, well, with God's guidance, with God's guidance, we have gotten better at being in military in our army, and we've trained, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, okay, well, where did you get the equipment? Meaning the best.
This is exactly what I wanted to say. It's like, so look, you can be, it's nothing wrong to believe in God. In the contrary, many people believe in God and they follow religion, but you can't come and say with God's guidance, we have received weapons, ammunition, gear, intelligence support, drones. And this is not God's guidance. This is Erdogan's guidance. This is Netanyahu's guidance. And this is the US administration guidance. This is not God's guidance for sure, 100%. And now Erdogan, as we speak now, just 30 minutes ago, he, of course, because he's a good boy and he prays to God and he's very very good believer in God and he doesn't harm anyone. I'm just being sarcastic. He left the mosque. And he gave a statement to the press saying that he hopes for these, he calls them opposition groups, to march to Homs and then to Damascus. So he's not even hiding any longer his guidance, let's say, for these opposition groups to march to Damascus. I mean, there are so many, sorry to say, but in Syria we have so many jokes, and some of them are racist jokes about like when somebody is trying to fool you, you know. I don't want to use these slurs now live, but he thinks that we're idiots. We're not idiots, and we see through. And this is a neo-Ottoman conquest of Syria. This is an attempt to turn Syria into another a governorate for Turkey. And for those who want more understanding of this, go to X, Twitter, and type hashtag Halep, which is Halep is the Turkish word for Aleppo, Halep 82. And if you write Halep 82, you will see it's the trending hashtag in Turkey, and the people calling now Aleppo, which the city where I come from in Syria, is the governorate number 82 in Turkey, which means Turkey has 81 governorates, and now they consider Aleppo the 82nd governorate. Wow. And when they conquered my city, Aleppo, they raised the Turkish flag over the Aleppo citadel. The Turkish intelligence, the Turkish press, and Turkish officials were in Aleppo, and they're speaking about conquering the city. So I think this is nothing short. It's so comparable to what the Ottomans did in the past 400 years ago when they started conquering the region. They started it in Syria. They came from Turkey to Syria, and Syria for them was the key to expand their empire in the region. And that is why, because Syria gave them so much of a strength in the region, geopolitically speaking, they called it Sham Sharif. Sham means Levant. Mm-hmm. And Sharif means honorable. So they called Syria honorable Syria because Syria gave them the honor to expand in West Asia and North Africa and establish an empire. And Erdogan has been saying this for a long time. And he says that Turkey's borders should not be limited to the current borders. We have the legacy of the Ottoman Empire, and we have to create a Commonwealth system where Turkey plays an instrumental role and a leading role on the Arabic world. So all the 400 years of the past, when let's say the Arabs, the Syrians, the rest of the Levant were freed from the Ottoman rule at the beginning of World War I. He believes that this was a strategic mistake, and he has to reconquer these regions, whether through proxies, just like he's doing now by the Julani gang, or directly. So I think that what is happening now is an imperialist project. And imperialism is not exclusive, let's say, to the US and Israel. And he has aspirations in Syria, and he's now marching his terror army to Damascus. And the situation is, very difficult.
Well, I was going to ask you how, I mean, it's dire. Hama has just fallen, apparently. I think it fell yesterday. How did they catch the Syrian army so unaware? And the reason I ask this, you yourself had been talking about this, and apparently they had been bragging about this on Telegram. So if you were aware of it, how was it Syrian, Russian? Well, Russia, they're in a war, so fair enough. But how did they get so radically unaware where they're just routed? It's astonishing. It's amazing. Give me your take on this. How did this happen?
My friend, if I knew about it from 3,000 kilometers away about this attack, how they didn't know about it? I have the same question. It's like the officials should answer this question, because it's impossible not to detect the movements of the militants, and they have big mouths. They brag about it, and I'm sure the Syrian intelligence and the Russian intelligence, they have assets in Idlib learning about their operations. So it is quite astonishing to me as well that something like this happens and so quick. And I learned from my past mistakes as political commentator and analyst that when there is something happening and it's illogical, like there are things that you can't explain it in a logical way, this means there are certain factors that you can't see, they exist, but you don't see them in order to have a full picture. And I think there are factors in this case that we don't know. There is a hidden story behind this. It's impossible for the Syrian army to retreat like this in a quick way, like from Aleppo, and not withstand 5 days in Hama, because the amount of military, the reinforcement the Syrian army sent to Hama, they were huge. And like it's unexplainable how we could retreat, let's say, the Syrian army from Hama. So this means there are things that we don't know. And what is at play, nobody knows. So I would like to show the map of control over Syria, if you don't mind. You can take it on the screen if you want.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just for the people to understand what's happening. So this is the map of control over Syria now. These green parts here, those are the new areas conquered by this Julani gang. And this is Idlib. So they attacked from here on Aleppo and they conquered it. And now they are moving all the way to Homs. So this is Hama and this is Homs. They're already almost on the borders with Homs. The reason why they want to go to Homs is if you occupy this area, you will no longer have access to the coast. So if they occupy Homs and come to the west and block this road, then the entire coastal area will become like an island separated from the rest of Syria, which means the Syrian government will lose its access to the Mediterranean. And this area will be completely sieged. And this also means that any sort of assistance in terms of the fuel and gas coming from Iran to Syria to operate its military, it will be also gone, because now Iranians cannot send fuel to the Mediterranean for it to be recycled here and be sent to the rest of Syria. So they're doing, I would say, a clear cut military operation to cut the supply chains of the Syrian military and the Syrian energy resources, basically. And if they occupy Homs and move to the west, they will seal the borders also with Lebanon. And by doing so, they will hit two birds with one stone. One, they will separate, as I mentioned, the coast from the rest of Syria and try to start sectarian war here, because it is populated. There is a big Alawite population here, which President Assad comes from. So they want to take revenge against them. And secondly, by sealing the borders with Lebanon, they will try to establish a military belt around Lebanon in order to stop the supply chains of Syria to Hezbollah, because this is the American goal and this is an Israeli goal, and both sides asked Syria to cut the supply chains of Syria from Damascus and the rest of Syria to Lebanon. And when Syria rejected, now they're trying to do it through their proxies on the ground in order to impose a siege on Lebanon and eventually try to degrade and weaken Hezbollah. So it's a multifold strategy, and Erdogan and Israel are cooperating in this operation against Syria, whereas the pro-Palestine camp, I'm sure you've seen many people are nowadays on the side of HDS, Syrian opposition, Syrian rebels.
Yes.
And people have been hypnotized for a long time, brainwashed, psyoped by many media outlets in the region, including media outlets which claim to be pro-Palestine. But this is the psyop that they do. They support Palestine, they gain credibility, popularity, and they have a big financial base support. They are funded by Qatar, basically. And then these TV channels, they discredit the players who give tangible support to the Palestinians or to the Lebanese arms struggle. So they can't come and say, we want to, like Qatari outlets cannot come and say we are against Palestine, because that's too controversial and unpopular. But they can discredit the allies of Palestine, basically, and try to portray them as killers, as sectarians, as people having imperialist agendas in the region. So you penetrate the left-wing scene in the region and say that Iran and Hezbollah and Syria are not your friends. And your friends are Turkey and Qatar, basically. Who, one of them, Turkey is a NATO country, and Qatar is a major non-NATO ally of the US. And so this is how the PSYOP works. But if you see all these so-called pro-Palestine activists and journalists and podcasters, especially in the UK, those are all Muslim Brotherhood remnants. Those are the people of Qatar and Turkey, and they are craving for the days of the Ottoman Empire, where they were an Islamic caliphate in the region, and they have been the dominant force over the region. This is the reason why it's happening, and anyone else who tells you otherwise, these people are so dishonest and keep calling it a liberation, and like finally they're getting rid of the Assad tyrant.
Anybody who says liberation, I tend to discount. I mean, it's so obviously an overthrow attempt of the government. I'm curious, what is Syria doing about it? So Russia has apparently flown in Wagner, or well, Wagner doesn't exist in a typical way, but basically soldiers who were associated with Wagner. They have been apparently doing bombing raids, bombing attacks itself. Hezbollah has apparently said that they would send troops, or Iraq. The government itself has formally said that they wanted the president to get involved and send troops over in order to help. Is this enough, though? I mean, do they have enough force in order to push back the jihadists that are trying to overthrow the government? And another thing, Idlib. Like, Idlib has been a festering cancer that has just been sitting there, that even the UN talks about like 20, 30,000 terrorists are inhabiting that location, and it just stayed there. And I know the Astana agreements, I don't want to get to that in a moment, but just for the very basic question, does Syria have enough to push back the forces that have taken Aleppo and Hama?
So it seems from the advances of the militants that they are rapidly and very the advances are very speedy, and this leads into panic in the country, and especially among the people, ordinary people. Everybody's leaving their cities, and everybody's going to Damascus or to the coastal areas of Syria, because they don't want to live under these terrorists, basically. So there is definitely the factor of demoralization of the people, seeing that the speedy crumbling of the front lines of the Syrian army. Now, people may come and say, of course, like, what is this Syrian army? How could they lose? Like, all these armchair military experts on X giving advice to the Syrian military. I think these people, they haven't followed the Syrian war closely, because the Syrian army fought on every corner of Syria for 14 years now. And human beings cannot fight 14 years nonstop. It's impossible for them, the same person fighting. So you have to recycle, you have to have manpower. And in Syria, the military is like a service. You go and serve your country. It's not like a contract army. You go and join because you want to fight. So you have many people in the military. They are conscripts, right? And if they haven't been into war situations in the past years, they don't have enough combat experience, because in the past 14 years, the elite forces who fought against these terrorists have been dispatched and been sent home. I mean, they fought already enough for 14 years. How do you think that they can continue fighting? Their life can't be all fighting in a military service. If it was a contract army, and you're joining it voluntarily, it's your job to fight, and you agree to go and fight in exchange for certain incentives, for example. But in this case, I think the Syrian government has made a big mistake, thinking that the war is over. And it has given the impression that, we emerged victorious from this regime change war, and now we have to dispatch the military and start replacing them with new conscripts. I'm not saying that these old soldiers should have stayed, but at the same time, they should have found a formula to create at least a few military professional units, not from conscripts, but rather from people who want to fight for such emergency situations. And now we have a military, it's either exhausted, the old soldiers, or the new conscripts, against well-trained and well-armed NATO-armed and NATO-equipped, basically, a contract army. These people who are fighting now against the Syrian army, they have contracts with Turkey, and they receive monthly salaries from Qatar, and they have the best and new equipment from NATO countries, including jamming technologies, including satellite internet, And this is one of the reasons. Exactly, this is one of the reasons why the Syrian army retreated from Hama, because the militants jammed the communication of the Syrian army, and there was a confusion that they couldn't coordinate among each other. So they took the decision to retreat. So nobody can convince me that this is the job of the militants. I'm sure the Turkish intelligence is jamming, and there are rumors that they're using Starlink, because like the footage that they are posting with high quality and very speedy from the ground, it indicates that they have satellite internet, unlike the local internet in Syria, which is completely in tatters at the moment. Yeah. So they have every means to advance. Therefore, the intervention of the allies, the amount of assistance that we have seen, it's not enough at all. And the volunteers who came to Syria, they're in hundreds, and this is nothing compared to the threat.
From my understanding, it's like hundreds of thousands of militants that are involved in this. I mean, is that correct?
In Idlib alone, they have between 40 to 60,000 militants, and in the north they have probably again 20 to 40,000 militants. And not all of them are now in Hama, because they have to overstretch now in Syria. The most important factor in this is this coordination between the US, Turkey, and Israel. And these parties are all involved. Now, the U.S. is bombing the border crossings of Syria to stop the influx of volunteers coming to Syria to assist Syria from Iraq, for example. So the U.S. is acting as the air force of Al-Qaeda, basically, in Syria. Mm-hmm. Israel is also bombing Syrian military positions. And these American and Israeli fighter jets, they're not bombing Al-Qaeda forces. Does anybody realize that? And this is the point that I would like to raise to these pro-Palestine activists who side with Julani now. Why the Americans and the Israelis bombing what they call the Assad army and not these terrorists? Doesn't that indicate that the Americans and the Israelis are basically on the side of the militants? Yeah. I mean, it doesn't take so much genius to understand what's happening in Syria, but here we go. We have to explain things like people are, I'm not talking about your respected audience, but these people, like we're talking to 3-year-old kid, like putting the milk in the mouth so that the baby swallows, like it's crazy.
Why are they? I mean, why do you think there's that disconnect? Where they would look at, I mean, look, from my point of view, I support it. I support the Palestinian cause. I think it's a genocide. It's outrageous. But I also can look at this and say, okay, well, obviously the US, Turkey, and Israel have a hand in this and are backing, training, funding, and propelling this. I mean, even if you're looking at or listening to Lavrov, for example, in that interview, it is clear that Turkey is involved. They're doing everything in their power not to say it because they want to still negotiate with Erdogan to do something about the situation in Syria. Like, why do you think there's this disconnect between people in the sense of saying, okay, they support the Palestinians, but they turn around and say, hey, Julani is a diversity-friendly terrorist? Why do you think that disconnect exists? What are they looking at that I'm not seeing?
There are multiple reasons. Some people, they see the world from the American liberal lens. Everything for them is about democracies versus dictatorships, just like they see the situation in Russia. Putin is a bad guy and the Ukrainians are the good guys. This is a democracy, this is a dictatorship, so we side with Ukraine. So you completely take out the conflict from the context, which is the geopolitical conflict, the minerals, and the Black Sea, the nuclear weapons, like all the important factors. You take it out, and you just become someone like a robot, and like you have a Neuralink in your brain, and you're like democracies against dictatorships against democracies, and if Putin succeeds in Ukraine, then he will march to Europe. The same thing.
These guys are clearly not democratic. Like
yes,
I
know.
That's why that throws me, right? It's like these guys are clearly not democratic. They're
but
literally overthrowing the government.
Exactly, but if you watch CNN, I mean, the CNN journalist met with Julani and she's playing with him like a softball. You saw it, and they're trying to polish his name because they know the core of the issue. It's geopolitical, and they don't care who is executing this project. But the ordinary people, those who see from this particular American liberal lens, they see Assad as like the tyrant. So the Syrian people, those are the rebels. So we have to support the rebels against the dictator. And you have other people who are very sectarian. And those who watch what's happening in Syria, they have to also see it from the sectarian lens, because basically the jihadists in Syria, they see Assad as coming from a minority religious sect, which is the Alawite sect.
Right.
And they want to basically eliminate him because he comes from this religious sect, because for them, this religious sect is not Islamic enough, because the Alawites do not cover their heads, they drink alcohol, and they believe in some philosophical teachings beside Islam. So for them, Assad is an infidel, and we have to take him out and restore the Islamic rule over Syria. And then you have people who are completely psyoped by Qatar and Turkey, as I mentioned at the beginning. And you have paid activists. I mean, Qatar and Turkey, they pay activists to sit on X and tweet all day and every day. I mean, I know this because I received such an offer.
Did you? I know.
So I received such an offer and it's a brilliant offer. You can sit and you just quote post tweets on X and just post things that goes in line with their narrative.
Serious.
Of course, there's a lot like this. So I know that Qatar does it. And I want to mention something. Al Jazeera invited me to Istanbul.
Yeah.
Although they smeared me and they called me all sorts of names, according to Al Jazeera, by the way, I'm a far-right fascist, and so you're sitting now with a far-right activist, basically, which I'm day and night. I'm speaking and saying I'm an anti-imperialist person, and this is where I come from. But they call me right-wing, anyways. And secondly, although they smeared me, they invited me to Istanbul for a debate. So you go to Istanbul, and flight is booked. A 5-star hotel is booked, plus $4,000 in your hand for 40-minute show. This is how much money they pay if you are in line with their narratives. So there is lots of money in being pro-Turkey or pro-Erdogan and pro-Qatar in the region. And this is how they poison the left-wing scene. I'm sure you also know that in the US and in Europe, for example, there was a consistent attempt to break the left-wing scene, because the left-wing comes, the left-wing started basically to support the middle class and the below middle class, and it was all about economic factors. Their discussion revolved around economics and class struggle, but these imperialists, they wanted to break this because people's attention were basically against the true persecutors of the middle class, and that is the people who have the grip over the means of the production and the people who can impoverish the rest of the people. But also the left-wingers saw in the capitalist system in the US, which is draining the resources around the world, and for the war machine of the US and occupation and imperialism as a main threat for world peace. So they have to break the left-wing scene. And how do they do that? They do that through corruption. So they buy the left-wing intellectuals. They poison the people's brains by pushing the discussion from the class struggle into sub-identities, basically. Yes. People speak about gender, people speak about sexual orientations. Yeah. I mean, I don't understand why would anyone identify himself based on his sexual orientation. Why would I care about your sexual orientation?
And just to make the point, just to explain, like, that is something that they did in the US. So Hillary Clinton specifically, like the thought was, because political parties in the US effectively get money in order to run, they would go to billionaires and whatnot and say, hey, give me money and I'm going to run this race. The issue for the Democrats is that okay, well, lefties want healthcare, education. They don't want war. They want to improve Social Security. Like they want all of these things that the rich don't want to supply because they already have. And so it became easier to say, well, I am transgender. I'm a hermaphrodite. I am, black, white, gay, straight, whatever, as an identity, because there's no money that they have to put out their pockets for identity, as opposed to, hey, let's increase the minimum wage. Okay, well, that's different. That costs money. That goes after the owner class. That was the way they did it. That's the way it broke down. I mean, even when they're talking about people like Martin Luther King, they ignore that he was a socialist and just focus on, well, he was a black civil rights leader that was focusing on civil rights. I mean, I agree with you 1,000%.
I just want to mention one thing, which is it's sad and funny at the same time. I was in here in Germany in a friend's place, and I was sitting in the kitchen, and I saw on his fridge a sticker. It's written "Black Trans Lives Matter," and I thought about it, and I said, if you say Black Lives Matter, it also includes the trans people, right?
Right, it does.
And if you say Trans Lives Matters, it also includes the black people. But the amount of divisions they are creating in the society,
like carved out.
Yeah, but this is what they do with this type of talk, because now they completely distort the attention of the people and push it into different direction, whereas the real issues that are happening around the world by plundering the people's resources. How many left-wing people who say Black trans lives matter know that the US is looting our oil in Syria, right? Yeah. Maybe they have never heard about it because they are distracted by these cultural wars that the American establishment have pushed the population into it. And the right wing plays with them. The right wing and the left wing, they are the same side, they're the different side of the same coin. They're both playing identity politics. They're both playing against each other in cultural wars so that the people are distracted from the main issues. Why the US is sending tens of billions of dollars to Ukraine? Do they really think that Ukraine will emerge victorious? No, because they don't want to tell you, after withdrawing from Afghanistan and already recycling $2 trillion money there, they need a front line, a war to continue recycling money. This is one of the reasons why the war is still ongoing, despite the fact that every military general and serious military general and commander in all European and Western countries know that they can't win this war against Russia, but they have to continue it.
Just be clear, it's not just that. Look, from the U.S. point of view, hubris and this idea of control of the globe is on the line in Ukraine. Yes. And for them, losing it is such a shock to consciousness, right? It's like, well, wait a minute, we're the US. We're NATO. We've invested billions, trillions of dollars into this organization. And then the first war that we get into, we lose. They can't tolerate it. It's a shock of the conscience. They can't deal with it. But before I let you go, I'm super curious about this idea of how do you think this progresses? I mean, the last time around when this war took place, Syria had lost a massive amount of territory before it was a counterattack, in which case they were able to get the overwhelming majority of the territory back. The US ends up stealing a portion, Turkey ends up stealing a portion, and of course, you get Idlib province, which ends up becoming its own protectorate. They ended up with the Astana agreements. This idea of, okay, we're going to carve this up, and we're going to create a certain tension, but a balance within the context of that tension. I mean, where are those now? The Russians are trying to talk to Erdogan. What does Erdogan want in this? And are the Russians going to be able to make a deal with him in order to control the jihadis? Or is it, well, they've taken territory, I want them to remain the territory? Meaning, how do you think, will they be able to get a deal in order to stop the jihadis? Or that's not really on the table? I'm curious on how you think about the Astana agreements.
Erdogan says that this proxy army will advance to Damascus. If that is the plan, then I don't think there's going to be a new deal anytime soon with Turkey, between Russia and Turkey. Russia also has major strategic interests in the country. Yes. And they don't want for these jihadis to overcome the Assad government. Yes. I'm sure they want to see a different outcome. and they wanted to see also for different opposition groups to join the Syrian political system. So they were pressuring also Assad on the other side, which is not a bad thing. You know, if you have a patriotic opposition wanting to participate, and they're not on the payroll basically of the CIA and the Turkish intelligence and the Qatari intelligence, that's a healthy situation for Syria as well. We want
that's a
that.
healthy country, right?
Yeah, but they corrupted the opposition. Like if there was one uncorrupted opposition, they were spoiling this opposition. Like how can someone work as is an opposition a job? Like is there a job description for an opposition? How can someone live in different capitals around the world and finance himself unless somebody is paying this person? So they corrupted the opposition as well through this funding. Now, what Erdogan did, he backstabbed Russia, he backstabbed Iran, he outsmarted them basically. And this is something that I have to mention because during the last elections in Turkey, and he was not leading the polls, Erdogan, and the Russians and the Iranians wanted to help Erdogan. And they exerted pressure on Assad to meet with Erdogan and give him this photo op in order to amplify Erdogan's position, and Assad rejected. So Russia and Iran were not happy with Assad for not meeting with Erdogan. They were pushing him to meet with Erdogan for a long time. Yeah. I think now I think Astana was at one point, maybe it wasn't necessary for geopolitical reasons, but it turned out, just like the Minsk Agreement 1 and 2, it was an opportunity for these militants to regroup and rearm and take the time enough to wage this attack. So this is the same NATO-style agreement, which they striked in Ukraine, giving Ukraine the time to arm and receive enough weapons to provoke this war. And now they have done the same thing in Syria. So I don't think you can't really trust Erdogan any longer. Like you can't really fight against him. He's a NATO country and he has a large military, but having him in your pocket is like a scorpion, you know, like one day or another he will come after you. So Erdogan, I think it's the devil that you have to deal with him. You can't really eliminate him, but you have to contain him all the time. Otherwise, when he feels there is a window of opportunity, he comes out like he did now. This is Erdogan's war in Syria in cooperation with Israel, and the Russians and the Iranians now, if they want to send reinforcement to Syria to restart a counteroffensive and gather troops and plan, this will take months. And the militants could be already in Damascus till then, right? So this has to be done very quick.
I mean, from your point of view, how do you think this turns out ultimately? Do you think? I mean, because you're right, Russia has this. God, man, there's so many interests that's going on here. As you pointed out, the U.S. and Israel wants the shipments that are coming from Syria to stop. That basically that are going to Hezbollah. The U.S. also wants to be able to put its thumb in the eye of Russia because they know that Syria is an important strategic asset to Russia. Like there's so many interests that are kind of balled up into this kind of one country. How do you think this ultimately ends out? Do you think the Russians will send heavier reinforcements for counterattacking the situation? Do you think they'll be able to, do you think the Syrian military and the Russian military currently will be able to stop the militants in their advance? How do you think this ultimately turns out?
Lavrov said with Tucker Carlson that they will meet in Doha. I think this is going to be tomorrow or today. Yeah. So it depends on the results of the meeting between Iran, Russia, and Turkey. And if Erdogan rejects to withdraw from the territories that his forces occupied, I think there is not going to be a political solution, and it's going to be military. And the Russians have two options: lose Syria, lose access to the Mediterranean. Iran's access of resistance is gone completely. So the United States have achieved two goals with hit two birds with one stone. And the Russians and the Iranians are completely out of Syria. So it's up also to them, because the Syrians are not only fight for themselves. They're also, this is a strategic fight for also for the struggle against the American hegemony. And if the Russians and the Iranians want for the US to stay dominant force in the region, then they can delay they should delay this support to Syria. But if they want to counter the hegemony of the US effectively, and for once and for all, and not like the last time when the Syrian army was advancing everywhere and they were reaching concrete victories, and all of a sudden they said, let's stop and Astana agreement and freeze the conflict and give them time to rearm and come back. No, if that's going to be the case.
Why did they do that? I'm sorry to interrupt. Why did they do that? I never understood the Idlib thing. Like, they were able to take back so much of their territory. Then they get to Idlib. The U.S. threatens, like just mind-blowingly threatens that they would kill anybody that tried to attack Idlib. So I guess there's that they didn't necessarily want to provoke the U.S. on that front. But Idlib was a festering sore. I mean, it was obviously a terrorist haven at that point. Why didn't they resolve that? I guess there are 2 points. One, I agree with you. I don't necessarily think that Russia can allow Syria to fall. I can't see it. It would be a strategic failure, blunder like nobody's business.
Yes.
So there's that point. And the other point, explain to me why they left Idlib the way it is during the Astana agreements. I don't quite get it.
The Russians, as I said, they know Erdogan is a megalomaniac. He has aspirations, but at the same time you have to deal with him. So they have to find like a middle ground, and they didn't want to lose Erdogan in the context of their struggle against NATO. Erdogan plays both sides, so he is trying to gain, like he's putting his eggs everywhere, as you can see. He wants to get as much as benefits possible. But at the same time, many Europeans do not appreciate that Russia, he cared about the European security more than the Europeans cared about their security. The US said that Idlib is the largest safe haven for Al-Qaeda terrorists since 9/11. This is the US Pentagon assessment. And if you want to liberate Idlib, where do you send the jihadists? Like, they will go to Turkey, right? This is the only border they have. And if they go to Turkey, where do you think they're going to try to come? To Europe.
They're going to Europe, yeah.
Yes. So Russia basically protected the national security of Europe more than the Europeans served their own national securities. They don't understand these things. But I just want to give you one example.
Please.
They woke up very late, the Europeans. I don't know if you saw my warning posts that this attack is going to happen. And the first time I posted it was on the 30th of September. Mm-hmm. I knew about it 2 months ago that it's going to happen. The second day, an Arab diplomat called me, and he said, Kev, I want to ask you something. What are your sources that this attack from Julani gang is going to happen? And I said, like, the source, it doesn't matter. I don't want to share my source with you, but I'm sure they're going. Yeah. I'm sure that they're going to attack Aleppo. And he said yesterday, a European diplomat called me, and he said he trusts your reporting and he follows you on X. He has a fake account, and he's terrified that your reporting, if your reporting comes true, then this attack means that there's going to be influx of refugees again from Syria to Turkey, and then they have to receive more refugees in Europe. Right. And I was astonished that this is the only thing they care about, refugees coming to Europe, whereas millions of Syrians are under the threat of this terrorist group, and their country is being transformed from a multicultural and tolerant country for all religions and sects and ethnicities into a one-color state. The only thing they care about is, like, we don't want more refugees because we don't want the rise of the right-wing groups, etc. But my reporting turned out to be true, and my information turned out to be true, and now the Europeans have to deal with a new reality, that is Syria is coming under the rule of a group which they call a terrorist group. The Europeans and the Americans call HTS a terrorist group, and they put $5 million on the head of Julani. And then the CNN journalist goes and talks to Julani in Aleppo like nothing happens. Do you really think that she went there and without her mobile, for example? Do you think that the Americans do not have the GPS and the location of Julani now? Like, he is walking in the streets in Aleppo. If they want him, they can kill him. But why don't they do that?
Well, they're using him as a weapon for their own geopolitical global interests. Man, thank you for this. I really appreciate this interview. I am deeply
Me too.
sorry
Thank you.
what my government is doing in this situation. It's like I said, there's some days you wake up and you realize you're not on the right side of history on this stuff. And I swear the U.S. is doing any and everything in its power to stay in control. I'm sorry, man.
I'm happy that you're awake. I'm happy that you're awake, and many of you like awake, not woke. The woke are not awake. and you know, it's very important for people like yourself to have a platform and speak about these cases and try to educate the people. It's unfortunately too late for Syria, and it's been completely in ruins at the moment. But at least for other people, you know, because what the US has done after World War II is it has unleashed death on hundreds of millions of people, and it killed millions of people after World War II. This is something that should stop. And it's you call them sociopaths. Like they are psychopathic sociopaths. They don't care about, like, we are flies for them. They can kill hundreds of thousands of us like nothing happened. As long as it serves their financial interests and geopolitical interests, we are just cannon fodders, like they did with the Ukrainians, killed hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians to just try to weaken Russia. So for them, they don't care about human beings. We are nothing for them. So let the people wake up and see that what their politicians are doing.
You know, I gotta be honest, that was the hardest thing for me to get my head around. Like when I started into the media space, and, you know, in the US, you grow up with this idea that we're the good guys, even though we may do bad things, we do it for the right reasons. We are love and light. We believe in democracy. So you get all of that stuff, and you get all that stuff from media, from school, etc. And I remember when I finally hit my head on it, I was like, whoa, this doesn't make sense. I was like, how are we doing this stuff around the globe? And then I had to kind of just accept we don't care about life. Especially if we need to accomplish some kind of geopolitical objective. We just don't care about life. It just doesn't matter to us, whether it's in South America, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's in the Middle East. We just don't care. That is a hard thing for somebody to accept and come into the kind of understanding of. No, it's horrendous. I agree with you. Kevork Almasian. Am I pronouncing that last name correct? By the way?
Yes. I wanted to ask you, your first name is Jamal or Jamal?
So it's Jamal. My mom put an R in the name.
That's the first time I come across your name. What's the origin of your name?
I get you know, when I'm in the Middle East, I get hit with that all the time. People are like,
Jamal.
Where's the R coming from? My mom. So in the States, Black people just take what they like.
Like adding spices on your name, you know, like it's a Jamal.
That's the name, and she was like, "Oh, I like that. I'm going to name my kid Jamal."
Really nice name.
Yeah, she that's what she liked, and that's what she went with.
That's really cool.
Man, I was traveling through Israel once, and they stopped me at the border. I get interrogated at the border, and they're like, "Why do you have a Muslim name? Where is this coming from? Who's your grand?" I mean, they read the riot act purely for that name being Jamal.
Wow, man!
So,
wow.
Yeah, it's my mom just liked it. There was no magic to it. Thank you for this, man. I really appreciate that. It's a very informative interview. You have been doing God's work. I swear you have, as opposed to, you know, the one who's from God, Julani, saying with
God's guidance,
God's guidance, and American money. But no, man, you have been doing God's work on this issue. Keep it up.
Thank you so much. Thank you, man. I really appreciate it. Yeah.
Be safe, please.
Bye.
Have a good one. All right. Kevork Almasian, he is a geopolitical analyst and host of Syriana Analysis. His look, as he pointed out, I swear, man, I don't quite get how he would know that this was happening. Meaning he was fully aware, he was talking about it. He had communications about it, apparently back channelable, and yet it still happened. And you have to ask yourself, okay, well, how did this happen? How did either the Syrian, the Russian, the Iranian militaries not see this? And I understand that Russia fired the general that was apparently on the ground in Syria, and they sent a guy who was far more aggressive in dealing with this stuff. But it is a question to be asked about how did they drop the ball to this degree where you have an overrun of Aleppo, an overrun of Hama, without the Syrian military seemingly being able to put up a decent fight and a decent struggle to defend those areas. For that matter, when there's a large contingent of military force in and of itself, we're talking about like 100,000 people with equipped with NATO weaponry, NATO vehicles. For God's sake, they even have tanks. And you ask yourself, okay, where do terrorists get the stuff from? Now, from my understanding, part of the money was coming from the oil that was being stolen from Syria. So think back to the interview that Donald Trump had, where Donald Trump tells the person, the media is basically asking him, well, hey, you pulled out of Syria. And Donald Trump said, well, we pulled out, but we're stealing the oil. We're keeping the oil. We're taking the oil. We're taking the oil. And his point is, look, man, we did pull out, but we're going to keep the oil. Okay, well, that oil was being sold, and that the profits of that was going to something. Also, let's be very clear. Turkey, the US, Israel, all of these countries are intimately involved in this escapade, giving these guys military training and equipment in order to accomplish this particular objective, because all of those forces had something that they wanted out of it. Israel wanted to break this idea of weapons and materials coming through Syria in order to support the resistance in Lebanon, or for that matter, in Palestine. From the US standpoint, they are losing a war right now with Russia. Syria is one of the main geopolitical allies of Russia, especially considering the placement of Syria. And so the US has two goals in mind. A, we can assist Israel in breaking the back of the resistance. And B, we can undercut and subvert Russia and one of Russia's geopolitical allies. There's a third point to this, believe it or not, Iran. If you look back, Seymour Hersh wrote this article, I think it's called Redirection. He wrote this back, I think, in 2007, 2008. And what he pointed out was that the US was changing its point of view of what it wanted to focus on in the Middle East. And what it wanted to focus on was effectively Iran. And they thought the way to get Iran is to go through Syria and to find militants that don't necessarily like the Syrian government, extremists that would basically do the dirty work for them. And so they started focusing on radicalizing, and not just radicalizing, training, equipping, etc., giving all sorts of money to that cause. And so this was something that went back, over a decade in the making, that they were effectively trying to accomplish the first time around under the Obama administration. It didn't work. Syria was able to take back their territory with the help of the Russians and Iranians, because Iran knew that they were next if indeed Syria fell. And so this is like 20 years, 15 years in the making. This geopolitical gamesmanship, this world as a chessboard that doesn't in any respect care about the human beings and the lives that are being lost and destroyed in these wars. Imagine yourself being a barber in Syria, just trying to make ends meet, and you all of a sudden have to suit up to go and fight a war that the US is launching against the government of Syria. This is not about whether or not you like Assad. This is not about whether Assad is a great man or whether he is the most ethical or more. It's not that. It has nothing to do with that. Same thing with Saddam Hussein. Has nothing to do with what you thought about Saddam Hussein. The idea that destroying that country, getting 1 million people killed is somehow a better outcome is outlandish. Outlandish. You're talking about a country that is tolerant of various religious groups, that whatever you want to think of it, at the very least, there's a lot of people living in it of different nationalities or different religious sects. And the group that are taking over, the diversity-friendly jihadists, as they've now been called and labeled by Western media, is going to set up a one religion state. They do not have these proclivities for diversity. about the other populations. They have been chopping off their heads, including of kids, and they've been putting the stuff on video, not like the Israeli claim of all of these women were raped and all of these babies had their head chopped off. Not that, because you don't have any videos of that. You do have videos of this. And CNN giving an interview as if this is just the normal guy who just believes in democracy and just wants to overthrow the Syrian government because he believes in democracy so much. Nonsense. Utter nonsense. They are literally in the process of overthrowing a government and killing any and everybody in their way in the process of doing that. That is outrageous. We are helping them in that pursuit. The U.S. has been bombing various areas of Syria in order to prevent any other resistant group from going and help in that war, in that fight, isolating the Syrian government, or at the very least doing their best to try to. We are not the good guys. That's what it boils down to. We could be a force for freedom and justice. We could be a force for love and light. When I point out that we are at war, the sides of that war are people of good conscience, people who believe in somewhat of a democratic order. Those are the people who are on one side of it. Sociopaths are on the other. We're in a war. It's a global conflict entirely by countries. It's also fought by people of good conscience who try to call out this stuff and pay attention to what is taking place around the globe as these disasters and horrific outcomes occur, purely because the hegemons don't want to give up their hegemony. And for whatever particular reason, obviously the reason is power, realize that that power is slipping away. I want to go to my next guest. We are joined with Ted Raw. Ted Raw is political cartoonist, syndicated columnist, and one of my favorite people to talk to. How you doing, Ted? You doing all right this morning, man?
I'm pretty good. You know, I broke my wrist about a week and a half ago, so I'm kind of like on pins and needles. I'm going in for the follow-up visit on Monday. And aside from the fact that it's, of course, out of network, which is pertinent to the news these days, I'm going in on Monday, and if they like what they see, then it's like, just keep wearing the brace. Everything's cool. You're doing great. Go home. But if they don't like what they see, they're going to break it right there and then and reset it, and then send me into surgery. So it's kind of like, yeah, Monday's going to be either a great day or not a great day.
I feel you, man. Things have been tough here too, but not, fortunately, not any breaks or anything like that. I don't have insurance either, so I feel you. Insurance will.
I do have insurance. It's just
you have insurance. Good. At very least, you have insurance.
You know, and we can talk about that. But I mean, that's kind of like, I think what people always talk about, and I'm guilty of this too. Whenever I write about the health crisis in this country, I always focus on the uninsured, and rightly so. But what we don't talk about is the fact that being insured is kind of not much different than being uninsured.
It still sucks. I mean, like, you know, the idea that you lose a job, and they say, but hey, you can get Cobra, and it only costs $1,000 a month. It's like, I just lost my job. What are you talking about?
Aren't you lucky?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, aren't you fortunate now that you have the option to get this? And it's like, you guys have lost your mind. Like, the idea that the country functions this way is deplorable. Like, insurance should not be tethered to jobs. It should be. No. And then, you know, what sucks about it, Joe Biden gets in and says, I'm going to have a public option. And then immediately forgets it the moment he gets in office. Again, that is one
Barack Obama said the same thing. Yeah.
These people are liars. And, you know, you get people like on The View who are shocked by the whole thing that Joe Biden lied about pardoning Hunter Biden. And it's like, right. I don't even call it a lie anymore. Okay, you people are in a cult. You have lost your mind. It is literally a lie. And he did so for purely cynical reasons of Donald Trump is saying that the legal system is a fraud. The legal system is out to get me, et cetera, et cetera.
Democrats Which it
was. That's the wild part. And Democrats are like, well, we believe in justice, and we believe in it so much that Joe Biden is even giving his son up to the justice system. I mean, it's like, okay, you guys are so.
For he loved the American people so much that he gave his one of his
Biden so loved the world that he gave his only begotten crackhead son. You mentioned I'm glad you mentioned healthcare. The CEO that got shot, and you know what's wild about that? To show how much the American public hates the healthcare system, after he gets shot, people applauded. Think
Yeah.
about that. Like, if you look at the comments on the video of him being shot, it's people effectively laughing or applauding, just astonishing. And this happened in New York.
99%. I've been
Yeah.
reading all the comment sections at the Times, the Post, all over the place. Obviously on all the socials, it's 99%. There's 1 in 100 who are like, "Come on, guys! Like, you know, it's not cool. He's a human being. Like, we shouldn't be talking like that." Even they, the 1% who say we shouldn't be talking that way, they're not saying, "Guys, he was a great man. I mean, this was a good man. Like, he was awesome." I want to put this really into perspective here. When Donald Trump, the assassination attempt, right, which claimed the tip of his ear, this is a highly polarized electorate. Half the country despises Donald Trump.
Mhm.
There was not nearly as much contempt from Democrats who do hate Trump for him, and as much glee. There was some glee, but for this relatively minor thing,
they didn't want to say it. They didn't want to say it.
Right.
Like, they were,
but
it
they're
was
willing to
muted
say it
glee.
here.
Yeah,
That's right. That's really a good point, Jamal. Right? People feel safe. Like, like you're allowed to say this person was evil and deserved to die.
Yeah.
I mean, that's remarkable. I mean,
Yeah.
I live very close to the youth hostel where he allegedly stayed. I'm not sure it's the same guy. I think the NYPD are kind of like blowing smoke up our.
Well, he showed his face. He was apparently flirting with some tech or some receptionist, and she asked him to pull down. And so he pulled down his mask. They actually have a picture of the guy. If it wasn't for that, they would have.
That's him. I'm not sure.
Well, if that's him, fair enough. Fair enough.
I'm not sure it's him. And here's my thinking. Right, like Junior Detective. I was talking to Scott Stantis about this, cartoonist, and we stare at faces like the day is long. We all do as human beings, but we do it more. So first of all, those aren't the same jackets. The shooter wore a jacket without pockets. The guy in the youth hostel has got big pockets. Okay, you're a guy. No guy in the history of guys ever has traveled with 2 jackets. We don't do that. Men don't travel with 2 jackets. And you're like, well, you can. Yeah, you can, but you don't. Okay.
Right. That's it's too much weight to carry with you. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And it's like, especially this guy was probably traveling super light. He came in allegedly on the Port Authority bus from somewhere, stayed at a youth hostel. So he's traveling light. He's there to assassinate someone. He's traveling light. He's not bringing his curling iron.
Right. He's not on vacation. Right.
He's on vacation. And he doesn't seem to be stupid, right? So this would be stupid on his part. And then there's the facial features. I can see why the cops thought it was the same dude. The eyebrows and the nose are very similar. But the eyes are totally not the same. They're not the same eyes. And I know all us white guys look the same, but like really, truly, I don't think it's the same dude. I don't think. And
honestly,
I hope that like the wrong dude doesn't get shot accidentally, because I really don't think that's him.
If it's not the same guy, then they have nothing.
I don't think they've got anything.
Wow.
And like I got to tell all the New Yorkers I know who oh, would you have, if you saw that guy, what would you do? And people, like, everyone I talk to is like, either give him a high five or invite him to stay at my place. Ron Kuby, who's on my Facebook feed, famous left-wing lawyer, he's like, hey, if you happen to have shot a healthcare CEO and you need a lawyer, call me.
God, man, what's wild about that? Like, there's an irony associated with this. He is a healthcare guy, meaning all things being equal, you would think healthcare, keeping people alive, keeping people safe. And you would think that people would be appreciative of keeping them alive and keeping them safe. But it gets across, you are doing something wrong if the American public sees you get murdered on video and they just like think about how wild that is.
I've been thinking about it a lot, and I think I know why, right?
Yeah.
Because that guy he literally is an existential threat to you personally. I mean, you might not like a politician like Harris or Biden or Trump, but they don't threaten you personally unless like
Right.
maybe they're at a drone control in the White House
Right.
and you're in the Middle East. But they don't. You can hate them, you can hate their policies, but everybody's dealt with these insurance companies and put in a claim and had it, or like a pre-approval request and had it turned down. And sometimes it's for something that's just annoying that you'd like to get taken care of. Although that's maddening. Like I had something stupid turned down like years ago. It still pisses me off to have my warts removed from my hand. I'm like,
Yeah.
they're like, oh, you don't have to have, you can live with those. Like what? And then, but like people who have life-threatening conditions. My mom fell, broke her wrist. I mean, her hip separated completely from her leg, completely. And then so I get this social worker who's a nice lady, obviously beleaguered, trying to do her best, calls me from Ohio and says, okay, so it starts using all this jargon, right? My head's just spinning. Like my mom is my entire family. I was raised only by her. I don't have any siblings. I don't have a father. I mean, it's just her.
Same here.
So I'm spinning out, right? And they're like, I start using all this jargon, like, oh, so we need to know, her insurance will cover her for 3 more days, and we need to know, are you going to go with self-payment?
Wow.
Are you going to go with, what are you going to do? I'm like, what? And it's like she's just, and the hospital was $24,000 a day just for the room. And I'm like, can she stay at the Marriott? I mean, it's like for the room. That's not including any.
That's outrageous.
Any treatment, right? Best hotel room in the world, right? I mean, invest in hospital stocks. I mean, it's obviously a great business. And so I'm just thinking. So I'm sitting there trying to figure out what to do. And like that. So people have. We know that hundreds of thousands of Americans die annually because they don't get, their insurance companies don't sign up. So literally, that you could get, I don't know, you get a disease, you get hit by a car, something can happen to you, and you can end up in a situation where, sick as you are, you or your loved ones, assuming you have any, are on the phone dealing with these assholes who are basically just like, who don't even know you, who haven't even laid eyes upon you, and they're deciding whether or not you live or die, or whether you have any quality of life if you live. And so, honestly, if you're not going to hate, that's apex hatred because it's really personal.
And everybody has dealt with it. That's right. I look, man, I would tell you, my mom was getting, she was trying to get medical treatment for her niece. And she was trying to get, either it was a drug or it was a treatment, and the insurance company was like, yeah, no. And like they have fundamentally created a business model of where denying you is advantageous to the business model. So it's like, so you have a healthcare, but denial of healthcare is one of the things that is important in that business model of healthcare. It is bizarre. I was working at this company, and beside our company was another company that, I got to be honest, at the time I didn't even know existed, that dealt with, they would hire doctors to deny care. So it's like, let's say you call the insurance company and there will be a doctor, and the doctor would say, oh, they don't need that. And they come back, I'm sorry, Mr. Thomas, we have decided that you don't need this particular treatment. You can use this other thing that doesn't work as well, that is cheaper.
Right.
That is maddening. Like that is maddening. And
we need a law that says as follows: if a doctor signs off on it, the insurance company has to pay for it.
Yes.
Period.
Yes.
I mean, and then we could get into all the other crap like the deductibles and and the co-pays and all that. But that's first. If a doctor says it's on, it's on. And I'm old enough to remember, Jamal, like back in the 1970s, 60 Minutes used to have all these exposés. Because back then, I remember my mom had Blue Cross Blue Shield. She was a teacher. And it was great. Okay, it's hard to believe that. It's not the same company now at all. I'm sure it's not even like,
what is it, Blue Choice or something now?
Well, it's still now. It's like there's different. There's Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield. There's Empire Blue, and I don't even understand. But the point is, it was back then. You had Blue Cross Blue Shield. That was like a platinum American Express card. You just showed that, boom, you never heard anything again. You never received
Yep.
a bill. C'est tout. And like, so back then it was great. But anyway, 60 Minutes would have these exposés about, particularly in Florida for some reason, where these like strip mall doctors would be running these scams where they're, prescribing all scripts for all sorts of unnecessary tests for like their buddies, and they're collecting like $1 million each. Okay, so HMOs, which appeared in the Reagan era in the early 80s, were supposed to be, and now our current system is all completely evolved or devolved from that. That was supposed to fix that problem, and well, it sure has fixed that problem. But now we've gone from, a situation where 1% of doctors were prescribing tests that maybe you didn't necessarily need in order to grift a little bit. Now you have 100% of doctors being turned down for completely legitimate, care, and it's completely out of control. Today the New York Times has a piece about like, healthcare CEOs have been woken up by this incident, and I was thinking, oh, they're going to stop denying claims? No, they're going to hire more security.
Right, they're going to hire security guards.
I don't think there's enough security in the world to save you fuckers.
Yeah, man, I was watching.
Good luck, and you're never going to find anyone to convict. By the way, I was
watching the tweets.
I'm on that jury. I'm saying everything to get on that jury. I can be objective. Yeah, I don't have any opinion. I have not even heard about this case. What case? Healthcare, never heard of it. Yes, I'm on. And it's like,
if it's up to me, that guy walks.
Jury nullification, Ted Rawl, right here.
Yeah, if it's up to me, that guy walks. That guy's going home. I'm giving that guy.
Yeah.
Everybody.
Yeah.
And I know that's grim, but
beers are on me after trial. Yeah.
Right. Right after you walk out here. I know it's grim, but it's like people like it is a horrible industry. And it's not like, it's something that all of us on some level at some point are gonna have to deal with. Yeah, and traffic's in death, basically denying people care. I'm sorry,
it's literally worse than the defense industry. It's that bad. Because the defense industry only exists to kill people or threaten to kill people, right? But you know what it is. I mean, the healthcare industry is the ultimate wolf in sheep's clothing.
It's supposed to be healthcare, and profit is the driving force of that healthcare. It is frustrating. It is aggravating. I feel you on this. One of the other fascinating things to me is Mayor Adams. Mayor Adams seems, in the wake of his criminal indictment, or at the very least the looking on Adams by the feds, have taken a political turn. Now, I don't know if this is always where Adams was, and he just feels free now to do this. But I noticed that when Donald Trump had just gotten elected, and Adams was giving interview after interview where he was like, look, we shouldn't call them a fascist. We need to stop this nonsense. This stuff doesn't really help us politically. He started talking about immigration and, Joe Biden administration and these immigrants, they're messing up the foreign policy. Like, he seemed to have taken a turn. Recently, he did an interview where he said this, and I want to get your take on this. And because I wanted to know what New Yorkers are thinking of this situation and whether or not you think Adams is right.
You can look at that on a multi-faceted approach of everything that's wrong with the system that we're facing. One, look at the photo that they used to show the victims. It seemed like it was a young, innocent child who was brutally murdered, and it gave that impression. When you looked at the photo that was being used, it wanted to set up in the minds of people that we were dealing with a young, innocent child that, just a Michael Jackson intimidator that, was just brutally assaulted. Then you look at the complete failure of our mental health system, a complete failure from the days of closing psychiatric wards and having those who needed help just turned over into the street without giving any safety net to accept them. Parents reach out to me all the time and say, I'm watching my child go down, or my loved one, my family member going down this serious decline. What do we do? A system where you brought people into hospitals, gave them medicine for one day and sent them back. The young man in this case was going within our system, throughout the revolving door of our system. Now we're on the subway where we're hearing someone talking about hurting people. killing people. You have someone on that subway who was responding, doing what we should have done as a city in a state of having a mental health facility. Those passengers were afraid. I'm hoping that the jury will hear all the facts. Based on all the facts that's laid out, a jury of his peers would make the right decision. And I don't want to prejudge that. I'm just looking at all the facts that are involved here and what we did to get to where we are and what we're seeing, because that could have easily been a case where you saw 3 innocent people murdered on.
That is fascinating, because that is not the typical Democrat point of view. The typical Democrat point of view is, it is outrageous. He just murdered a guy. He choked a guy for 19 minutes. And look, my point of view was, choked a guy for 19 minutes. Like, at some point you could have let the guy go.
Well, I think it was 6, right? But
6 minutes? Okay, fair enough.
6, yeah.
But Adams is basically saying, look, I wish all New Yorkers would get involved if somebody is aggressive on a subway, and that New York itself. By the way, I agree with him about the New York thing. I am one of those people who believe that society should not just throw people away like this.
Oh, sure.
We've been shutting down mental health facilities. Cops are not equipped for dealing with mental health emergencies. They are cops,
100%.
not, psychiatrists. Give me your take on what Adams is saying there. And do you see a turn in Adams? Adams seems to be, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's politically or otherwise. And maybe I'm getting this wrong because I'm so far away. He seems to have changed. That doesn't mean he's any better at being a mayor. I'm just saying politically, and the things that come out of his mouth seem to be a bit different. Give me your take on that, and whether or not Adams has shifted politically with Trump coming in.
It's hard to say like where he was to begin with compared to where he is now, because this was a guy so his background was that he was part of this group of Black reformist, high-ranking police officers in the NYPD back in the bad old days, right? I think they were called 100 Black men in law enforcement or something like that. And he was a big deal in that group. He was known as someone who, from within the department, was calling for some big changes in favor of the public, for less aggressive policing, or less, physically aggressive policing. And so he, most New Yorkers viewed him as one of the good guys inside the NYPD. Then when he ran for mayor, he definitely ran as sort of a corporatist to the right side of the Democratic Party. Of course, it's the New York City Democratic Party, so how far right is it really? But, he was not a progressive. He was not running that way.
Right.
And he emphasized the fact that he was a cop. So, it's kind of like the Tulsi Gabbard thing. Like, it's kind of like a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And so it's hard to pin him down ideologically. And I think what's happened now, and I think that's probably to his benefit, right? He's hard to pigeonhole. You've got now he's got this situation where he was thrown to the dogs by the Biden administration and the Democratic Party, because he was complaining that the federal government really didn't do anything to help the city post-pandemic and during the migrant crisis financially. And as the city was spiraling down the toilet, he started yelling in public, asking for the White House to throw some federal funds, which they were not inclined to do. And so they're basically, the optics are, let's make this annoying New York mayor shut the fuck up. And so that's what it looks like. Now, that said, he gave them plenty of ways to make them shut him up. He obviously has been involved in some sleazy and tawdry dealings between himself as well as the people around him. That's a separate issue. With Adams, what makes him interesting, and we've seen this with previous New York mayors, is he does say a lot of things that make sense. The clip you just played makes sense to me. And in terms of also the Daniel Penny stuff, I got to say, chokeholds are banned by the police, so the police aren't supposed to use them. So I don't know that encouraging civilians to use them is really the right move.
Right.
And there's also some pretty obvious, he paints a picture which I can, someone who rides the subway every day, I can commiserate with. You're trapped. There's a crazy person screaming and carrying on and issuing threats. You're scared to death, right? Well, there's also other things here too, right? New York City has no cameras inside the subway cars. It has no call panic button inside the subway cars. Down there in DC where you are, the Metro has those. Most modern transit systems have those. Even when we buy brand new rolling stock, those new cars don't have those. So it's not like a legacy thing. The doors between the cars on some of the older lines, they do open, but on the newer lines where the trains are longer, they don't open, and it's a safety thing because there's a big gap between when the trains make a turn, it creates a big gap, and it would be easy to fall off between cars. So it makes sense. Basically, in New York, if you're in the numbered trains, the doors open. If you're in the lettered trains, they don't. Okay. And so, they're on that F train, it didn't open. So all those things he said were true, but I would love to see someone say, come on, let's put in a way to call the cops. Also, or you could also have, a lot of cities have have rigged it up so that you can use your cell phone from between stations. In New York City, you can't. The cell phone only works inside the station. If you're between stops, it doesn't work. So at least people could use their own devices and call 911. So there's all sorts of things like that are like technological fixes that, seem like they need to happen. And just parenthetically, you didn't ask, I think Danny Penny is going to walk, and I think it's going to come down to the testimony of the prosecution witnesses who were fellow riders. It's going to come down to what would a reasonable subway rider who sees insane people every single day think this is a new level. Jordan Neely was at a higher level and was truly threatening in a way that was different than what they were used to. If they believe that, he walks. It'll just be an unfortunate accident, or maybe I could see it be manslaughter, really, like second-degree manslaughter. I mean, that would be a reasonable conviction. He was urged to release Mr. Neely as soon as he passed out, and he should have. I think so. There's all sorts of issues like that. I mean, at first, when the story broke, Penny was, they said that he was from Long Island, and that sort of implied like maybe he's paranoid and doesn't know the city very well, doesn't know any black people. But that's not true. He rode the subway every day. He had classes in Brooklyn. So I think experience, I mean, having been sat on New York juries, it's going to come down to what would you have done in that situation? Those 12 people, that's what they will ask themselves.
Especially if those people have rode the subway and they're used to that situation. Yeah, I agree.
It's every day. I mean, if you don't encounter mentally ill people in your subway ride, that's an unusual ride.
Wow. I mean, so what is it with New York? They just closed it. I mean, Adams points out they've closed down mental health facilities. And to be honest, they did this all over the world. I think Manila, if I'm not mistaken, did this piece on RT or something like that, talking about the mental health facilities that they shut down all over the world, all over the United States, and how it's like just because you shut down the facility, it doesn't mean that the mental ill just vanish, right? They have to go somewhere. And apparently they're showing up
under Reagan in the 80s is when it really started, and then basically, and you can't. They also changed the laws right after the Creedmoor scandal. There's a very famous documentary about that, where basically people were chained to the beds, and people as late as the 1970s, people were being forcibly committed, some of whom weren't even mentally ill. There was a guy who, in my neighborhood who, instead of just getting a divorce, had his wife committed to a psychiatric institution. She was fine, and it took her years to get out.
I want to talk about another issue that I'm fascinated about. Obama and Bill Clinton. So Obama comes out and points out that the Republican Party is involved in weaponizing the justice system to go after its political opponents. Now, this is rich, right? The Democratic Party has gone after Trump for years. And Obama's like, the Republican Party is using the justice system to go after people. Bill Clinton comes out, and Bill Clinton says, what is it? I don't think that we should stop. I think we should stop trying to criminalize politics, both of us. Well, they're acting like this is something that is coming out of both the Democratic and the Republican Party, whereas I would argue this is something that seems to be coming out of more Democrats than Republicans. This is Bill Clinton having a speech. Bill Clinton has been very vocal recently.
pardoning Trump. And by the way, there's some people who think that Trump should be pardoning Biden.
Well, I do think we should stop trying to criminalize politics. But on the other, I think we should, both of us, because obviously, and the people don't like it and they're not going along with it from right to left. On the other hand, you have to ask yourself, if you do this blanket thing, is there anything a president could do that he would or she someday would get in trouble for?
You think Biden should be pardoning Trump? And by the way, there's some people.
I'm curious on your take on this. Like, Joe Biden pardoned Hunter for 10 years, 11 years.
11 years, yeah.
11 years, going all the way back to the start of the coup in Ukraine.
Such an interesting date that he chose, yeah.
Very interesting date. And Garland made me aware of this because I knew the 10-year thing, but it didn't occur to me that this was 2014 when the Democratic Party overthrew the government of Ukraine.
Yep.
Joe Biden became the viceroy of Ukraine at that point. They were able to get information from Ukraine in order to go after Trump, leading to the arrest and imprisonment of Manafort. I had the guy on who was an ambassador in Ukraine at the time that was going on, Telejenko. And he pointed out that for all intents and purposes, Ukraine was owned by the U.S. Mm-hmm. Even when Joe Biden made that speech on stage where he said, I told him to fire the prosecutor or I'm going to withhold $1 billion. Okay, well, the Ukrainian government was so weak at the point that Joe Biden, according to him, was able to get them to fire a public servant. Like, imagine that, right? Like if somebody comes to the U.S. and say, I need you to fire one of your state prosecutors or something like that, we tell the guy, F off. That's,
right.
It'd be outrageous. But that government was so weak and so owned that they did it. I guess my point is Joe Biden trying to hide the goods here with this pardon, that this pardon is not necessarily something for Hunter Biden specifically, but also for him? I mean, if you look at some of those emails where he's like, I'm sitting with my father and you're going to give me that $20 million or else. Okay, well, obviously there was a financial relationship where Hunter Biden was leveraging Joe Biden's name for money. And I would imagine some of the letters like saying, I have to give a kickback to the big guy. Okay, well, the big guy was Representative Joe Biden. Ziegler, and I can't think of the other guy, the whistleblowers, pointed out we weren't allowed to go after Hunter Biden. We couldn't even look at the house, meaning we couldn't even walk and see the house. They even point out that we were even disallowed from looking at connections associated with Hunter Biden, meaning they were fundamentally blocked from that case. Hunter Biden, or Joe Biden, in his statement of pardoning Hunter Biden, said, well, I am doing this because this is purely politically motivated. And it's like, dude, how is it politically motivated? Either he paid the taxes or not. I think it was like $1.5 million. And then for the gun thing, he literally did that. So, how is it politically motivated? I guess my point is Garland right? That this is a lot to do also with Joe Biden himself, not just Hunter Biden. Very rarely do you see blanket pardons going back for 11 years. Just outrageous. Give me a take on this. And even what Bill Clinton was saying, we need to stop politicizing politics, missing the fact that it was the Democrats going after Trump for this more than anything else. Who do he think? Like, do they really honestly believe the Justice Department was politicized to go after Hunter Biden? I don't think so. I don't see it. If anything, it seems like the Justice Department was being held up from doing their job in going after Hunter Biden. But give me your take on this. What are your thoughts?
Well, Jamal, I mean, first of all, 11 years is a nice long run for a pardon. Richard Nixon only got 6 out of his pardon from Gerald Ford, going back to his election, taking the oath of office in January of 1969, all the way to his resignation August 9th, 1974. So, that's I guess that might be 6.5. Anyway, that's a shorter period of time. It's about half. I think Garland's right. I think it's a little subtle, though, and it's important to understand the mechanics of it. First of all, nothing in that pardon would prevent let's say a prosecutor decided to go after Joe now that he's no longer in office. Nothing would prevent that prosecutor from deposing or forcing as a hostile witness Hunter from testifying against his father. So that pardon wouldn't get him off the hook there. But what it would certainly do, it first of all, Hunter can't be prosecuted. So you can't try to flip Hunter by pressuring him that way. He's impervious to flippage. He is, and also obviously he has gratitude. You know, it's like, please look out for me. Okay, and Joe can say, son, I looked out for you. I did what you wanted. You know, I was a good father. I even took a lot of heat for you. Now, I mean, so the implication is like, please forget some of the things that, you know, we worked on together.
I need you to shut up. Right.
Yeah, I mean, I always tell people who are about to be deposed, like, you know, you don't have a legal obligation to have a great memory. And, you know, and you know, how good is your memory really? I mean, memory is objectively, it's tricky, you know, I mean, sometimes it fools you. So it's like, maybe better to say, I'm not really sure, or I don't really recall. I think that's what we're looking at here.
I want to ask you something else also. Mike Johnson. Well, I can go to Fetterman. Well, Fetterman broke Joy Behart's heart, but I'm not going to go to that one. I'm going to go to Mike Johnson. Mike Johnson recently, because, you know, Joe Biden is continuing the war, despite the fact that Joe Biden lost the race. Blinken has come out saying, I want you to send your kids to go fight, which is astonishingly cynical. They have lost that war, and he's still he wants them to send their kids, 18-year-olds, to a losing war. That is astonishing.
To a war that's over, basically.
To a war that they lost.
This is like in 1918, the Allies signed the surrender. They signed the armistice, and it was dated November 11th. So for several days, after, I think it was agreed upon on the 7th or the 8th, for several days they kept grinding it out, and thousands more people died for no reason whatsoever, other than they just wanted to have it end on November 11th at 11 o'clock, because, you know, isn't that cool? And school kids will remember that. Or it's like the Battle of New Orleans in the War of 1812, you know, which happened in 1815 after the war was concluded, but the news hadn't arrived in New Orleans yet. That's not anyone's
still
fault.
Fighting and dying.
And they fought for no reason, and Andrew Jackson became famous as the hero of New Orleans. Hero of what? You didn't know there was no need for this battle.
It is disgusting. I mean, like, it gets across how horrible these people are. So when it came up, Mike Johnson, Magic Mike Johnson, comes to the podium. Joe Biden wants to send billion more dollars to Ukraine. Now, again, this blows off the fact that this was litigated in the election. Harris lost on this issue. The orthodoxy lost on this issue, because the overwhelming majority of the public says we prefer Donald Trump on the issue of foreign policy. It's not that I believe that people went to vote specifically for foreign policy. I do believe, however, that those people, when you're looking at the exit polling and you ask them, who foreign policy do you agree with more or less than the other person? It's not even that I believe Donald Trump fully believes the stuff. It's more so that I'm pointing out that this is what he articulated and what the American public was regarding and judging it by as they were going to the polls to make their vote. Mike Johnson comes out and says this to Joe Biden.
The Biden administration requested to attach the upcoming CR additional aid to Ukraine to $24 billion. Do you plan to do that?
I'm not planning to do that. There are developments by the hour in Ukraine. I think, as we predicted, and as I said to all of you weeks before the election, if Donald Trump is elected, it will change the dynamic of the Russia war on Ukraine. And we're seeing that happen. So it is not the place of Joe Biden to make that decision now. We have a newly elected president, and we're going to wait and take the new commander-in-chief's direction on all of that. So I don't expect any Ukraine funding to come up now.
Basically, no. Basically, no. Sorry, Mr. President. You lost. You're lame duck. You're not setting policy ahead of Donald Trump. We're not going to preempt Trump. We're going to let Trump make his own decisions in regards to what he wants to do. If Trump wants to send money, God bless him. You, sir, no. You are not going to make that choice. I'm fascinated by that. The reason I'm fascinated by it, because the first time around, if you remember, Mike Johnson started off saying, I am not going to give funding to Ukraine. That is not what I believe in. That's not what I want to do. He has a conversation with Donald Trump. Trump pushes him, give the money. Johnson comes out, repudiates himself, and says, okay, I'm going to give the money to Ukraine. Fast forward to now, Johnson comes out and says, no, I'm not doing this. This money is not coming up. Joe Biden is not going to get what he wants on this. Is this Trump or is this Mike Johnson?
Oh,
and I know you don't know it's flat fact, but
there
still,
is no Mike Johnson. There is only Trump.
So there is no Mike Johnson.
Mike Johnson is just he's a chimera. He's a hologram. He doesn't exist. No, I mean, yeah, no. That Trump obviously, look, Trump told him to send the money. You're like, well, why did he send the money in the first place? Because it was an election year, and he didn't want it to become a political issue
Exactly.
that Democrats would be able to beat the Republicans with. Look, they're throwing Ukraine under the bus, so just don't have that issue. Send them the money for now, but that's going to change when I'm elected. And he got elected, and I mean, look, Donald Trump, like him or hate him, he is the president-elect, and he gets to have his own. He gets to have his own foreign policy. Happens to be a foreign policy that on Ukraine I agree with more than disagree with. But I mean, it is, and certainly Biden legally, technically, can try to do what he's doing. And I'm sure there's been funds appropriated that haven't yet been dispersed that he can now send. And he can do that. I mean, he can do it until 11:59 on January 20th. But it's kind of like, I mean, he's not just a lame duck. He's like a double lame duck because he dropped out of the race back, back in the summer. I mean, not to mention he hasn't really been president for 3 years. I mean, no Oval Office speeches, no press conferences. I mean, who knows? I mean, Tony Blinken's been running the country. So it's like, it's kind of like just tawdry, and whatever legacy Biden was going to have is trashed, and rightly so. It's overdue. It should have been trashed for a long time.
I agree with you. This has been one of the worst presidencies we've ever had, and Democrats are in the bubble on stuff, and they don't get how they alienate the population. They just don't. In conversations with Democrats, friends of the family, where I've talked to, and they were like, well, I mean, Trump is also going to support genocide. It's like, yeah, but you were in office. Why don't you get that? Right. Or what do you think Donald Trump is going to do for this stuff? And I was like, look, I agree with you. But what you're missing is that you have alienated so much of the American public by not philosophically being what you're supposed to be. Meaning, we have a party for the rich. We don't need to. And that is effectively what we have. And you get the overwhelming majority of the working class that decided to go for a blue-collar billionaire as opposed to the Democratic Party. That's astonishing. That should have like some level of soul searching as to why, as opposed to attacking voters.
They think it's they think, Jamal, they think it's their messaging. They think it's like, if only they understood us, if they weren't so fucking stupid, or we were a little clearer, we spoke louder and more and used smaller words, then maybe the morons who we need to vote for us, maybe they would understand how awesome we are and how much we love them and how we deserve their adoration. That's literally what they think.
Yeah. Well, it's worse than that, because now they've decided, well, we need to censor. We need to stop people from being able to say stuff, because if we can do that, then we can bring them back over to our fold and they can hear our messaging and everything else. That stuff is aggravating. Ted, man, always appreciate you, Ted. Thank you for
Thanks, Jamal. Have a great weekend.
You too. Ted Raw, political cartoonist, syndicated columnist. Check out Ted on TMI. He comes up from 10 to 12 on the name of the show is TMI. So
it's the TMI show with Manila Chan. It's and you can get it on YouTube and Rumble. Just go take a search.
Badass. Thank you, Ted. Have a good one, man. Be safe. Bye. Enjoy it. All right. We are continuing this show. Look, if you dig the show, if you dig the content, if you find yourself coming back here often, you can always support this content through PayPal, Patreon, or for that matter, Super Chats. All Super Chats, or stickers, as they call them, will be read, providing they're not racist, sexist, or bigoted. My job is to get to 40,000 by the end of the year. And damn it, I think we can do it. We are moving, and we're moving as a result of you and all of you. I appreciate it. I appreciate it deeply. I am going to continue to be consistent, giving you the news. Best damn morning show ever. Well, I can't say ever. Ever is a little presumptive, but nevertheless, the best damn morning show that I have come across, giving you news, politics, and for that matter, commentary on that news and politics. I try to be an honest actor on this stuff and just tell you exactly, flatly, straightly what is happening without the spin. I try to look at this stuff from a world perspective, sitting at the end of the globe, perched at the end of the world, looking at events without friend or favor, just giving you straight talk. So I appreciate you joining me for this escapade. You can be anywhere in the morning, so I do appreciate the fact that you end up here. I appreciate it deeply. I want to go to Lavrov. So Tucker Carlson has been doing God's work. It's shocking me that I'm saying that, but it's true. Tucker Carlson has seemed to realize that this country is at the brink of war, and that for all intents and purposes, it doesn't come across that way in media. Meaning, it's almost like people have been anesthetized. Either they think it's not real, either they think it's a video game, and Russia has been taking actions to show we are serious. This is not a video game. We and our security are paramount to us. And if you keep hitting our borders, if you keep launching missiles into our country, we are going to respond, period. Now, that message doesn't necessarily seem to filter into the American media space, because oftentimes what they do is just say, Putin said something, and they would give you their interpretation without letting you actually hear the words of what Putin or Lavrov or some of the other people are actually saying. We drop context. We allow people like sociopaths like Blinken, or sociopaths like Matt Miller, or sociopaths like Joe Biden, all of these people to give messages about what they intend to do, what is happening in the world, without necessarily giving you the honest talk about why it is happening, our role, and how these events are playing out. Lavrov had the opportunity to speak with Tucker Carlson. This is a big time, this provides the ability to give the American audience the Russian point of view. Now, that is important, right? Like any country that you're at odds with, you would on some level want to know why you're at odds with them. What is the thing? What is the edifice that is creating this conflict between these two massive countries? Two countries, by the way, that could end the world several times over. What is the cause? The US in the old days used to be far more confident about being able to show the other side's point of view, because we believe that we were right. We're freedom, we're justice, we're love, and we're light. So yeah, we can play their point of view because we're confident enough to hear that point of view and still retain our shape and believe that the American public is going to see us as being the correct party in this. That has changed. That has fundamentally changed. And that has changed in a way where we become far more insecure. We realize that our point of view of the hegemon is far more overt. It's not necessarily the velvet glove wrapping the iron fist. It becomes just the iron fist, and the rest of the globe sees it for what it is. All of this talk about human rights and democracy has found itself to be nonsense, and the rest of the globe sees it for what it is. When you see Blinken talk about human rights after allowing Israel to massacre 40,000 people, 20,000 children, and he talks about human rights, how do you take him seriously? How could anybody take him or us seriously in that process? They don't. The rest of the world don't, nor should they. When you see us backing head-chopping jihadists and then say that they are diversity-friendly terrorists or democracy-loving terrorists, how do you take us or the people who try to push that seriously? the rest of the world doesn't. They just don't. Lavrov sits down with Tucker Carlson, and Tucker actually has a pretty good interview. And some of the things that Tucker is asking him are things that should be asked, right? Especially considering where we are and how close we are to oblivion. This is Tucker. And this is Lavrov with Tucker giving a stark warning. I'm sorry. Let's do this. I realize that my timing is off. Okay, I realize my timing is off. I want to bring in my guests. Jordan, I'm sorry if I have to wait, man. I was doing my riff. I want to bring on a great friend of the show that I haven't had the opportunity to talk to. It's been a while. Jordan Sheridan. Jordan Sheridan is a journalist, and I think I can call him an author and journalist. Jordan Sheridan. Jordan, by the way, what is your channel? Is it just the Jordan Sheridan channel on YouTube, or is there a
Status Coup on YouTube? COUP.
Status Coup on YouTube? Man, I am so happy to have you here. How are you doing? You doing all right this morning?
Yeah, my 2-year-old was kicking and screaming, but I got her under control. So,
God, man, we're getting old. I swear to God, we are. You have a book that is coming out, and the book is on Flint, Michigan. And I remember when you were doing the coverage for that, you were one of the few journalists that were on the ground talking to the residents that were there and talking to the residents of what was taking place. And, there was supposed to be, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, a waterway that was supposed to be going one direction, and they decided to change it. And in changing it, you had all of these impurities and all of this other stuff that basically was in the water that was getting people sick. The government gets involved, but doesn't necessarily, is basically trying to sweep it under the rug while the people in the residents were still suffering from the consequences of that changeover. Am I getting this right? It's been a while since I come across the story, and I just want to make sure my memory is correct on it.
you're like 60% there. I'll take you the rest of the way.
Take me the rest of the way. Thank you.
And the book is out already, so people could get it on in most bookstores, Barnes and Noble, Amazon. We the Poisoned: Exposing the Flint Water Cover-Up, and it's out Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Audible if you want to listen to it instead. And essentially, the Flint water crisis, which is still going on actually, despite the media's blackout, was a good old-fashioned boondoggle and financial scheme that poisoned the community.
Wow.
Flint was getting its water for 50 years from Lake Huron, which is part of the Great Lakes in the Midwest. Great Lakes is some of the cleanest, purest water. It serves 20% of the world, their water. And so the city of Detroit sent Flint its water pumped out of the lake. And there was pretty much no health problems for 50 years. But politicians, residents were complaining that Detroit kept gouging, raising the rates for Flint. Yeah. So enter, Republicans love to, run government like a business. So in 2011, a new governor gets appointed, Rick Snyder, and he declares a financial emergency in Flint, waves a wand, and appoints unelected emergency managers to run Flint. So they took power over the elected mayor, city council. So as the media and, the Democrats are hysterical about democracy and Trump, here, like, democracy actually was canceled. It's already happened in America. So the first order of business for this unelected emergency manager, who was essentially just doing the bidding of the governor, was to privatize the water system. So Flint's getting its water from Detroit. The only issue is they're raising the rates. Let's create a brand new water system. So they did something kind of unheard of. Like, you don't need to be an engineer to know this doesn't make sense. They basically said, let's build a brand new water system, but it will be literally identical to the existing one. It'll run the same exact path. It'll be pumped out of the same source, the lake, and go to the same city. Like the map shows, it was just going identical. Yeah. The only difference is Flint was getting treated water from Detroit. So the water plant in Detroit, added the chemicals to make it safe, pumps it down to Flint, and that's it. The plant in Flint sends it to the residents. This new water system was going to be raw water. What do you need raw water for? Businesses, fracking, the auto industry, agriculture. They were open about it. They said this new water system was going to be the blue economy because it would be cheaper raw water for business. Most of the water wasn't even going to be used for residents. It was going to be used for business and fracking, which you need a lot of water for. Long story short, this new water system was going to take 2 years to build. So in the short term, they said, well, Flint, let's stop paying Detroit. We'll just use the Flint River, which had been polluted for 100 years. General Motors, Dow Chemical, DuPont was dumping its waste in the river. And we'll use this water plant, which is essentially like these Boeing planes that are falling apart midair.
Mhm.
The water plant did not have the proper equipment. It was missing key equipment. It didn't even have proper staff. 2 weeks before they switched to the river, they were moving folks from the garbage department to the water department. And cherry on top, Flint was broke. It couldn't legally even borrow any more money. It was nearly bankrupt. To build this new nearly $300 million water pipeline, which was unnecessary. They didn't need it because at the last minute, Detroit offered Flint, we'll cut your rate in half. So Flint would have just saved money if it would have just kept getting water from Detroit. But this new water system was not about saving money. It was about building a privatized water system that could enrich politicians, landowners, and be cheaper for business. So they didn't have the money to fund the construction. So they needed the city of Flint to be able to borrow money to build this pipeline. So they said, all right, the only way Flint could borrow the money necessary was if there was an emergency. So the politicians and the unelected emergency manager created a fake emergency, some like cleanup of some lime pit outside the water plant. They created a fake emergency to allow Flint to borrow $100 million to help fund this new water system. And the rest is history. They used the Flint River while that new water system was being built. And the water plant, which didn't even have the proper equipment to add the chemicals that were necessary, and lead came off the pipes because they didn't add the proper chemicals. You had bacteria in the water, forever chemicals. And right away, residents were getting, brown water, smelly water. But the governor at the time, this was kind of at a time long before, like a year or two before Trump entered the picture. So the governor of Michigan wanted to run for president in 2016. So you can't really have like, hey, I poisoned the citizens on his resume. So his administration, they basically covered it up. So my book shows like the real-time cover-up. It's honestly, I don't even think the best filmmaker could write a script like this because it involves like political payoffs. They were paying off residents to keep them quiet that were sick. They were destroying evidence. I mean, you're talking like shit as dark as desperate residents who were sick, losing hair, rashes all over their body, losing teeth. They sent 1,000 water bottles to the governor with messages inside, like, help us. The governor tells his people, get it out of my office. And his people burn them in burn barrels. How dark is that? Like sick, poisoned people are begging the government for help. And they throw the water bottles basically in fire pits. So there's a lot to it. But essentially, part of the story is the media was in on the cover up. I have reporting that a local station, ABC, killed a story 6 months after the water crisis that would have exposed it. They could have saved lives. They just killed the story. There's stuff in there about residents mysteriously having their brakes cut. Some of the top activists almost crashed. And then looking at security footage, seeing that hooded figures went under their car. So essentially, I have been told, this is my words, that this makes Watergate, which everyone, all the old fogies think is like the government cover-up, that this makes Watergate look like child's play. And I think tying into your stuff about Ukraine and other things, I mean, listen, whatever people think about U.S. foreign policy, and I have opinions, an American city was poisoned 10 years ago. The government covered it up and are leaving the people to slowly die because it's still a disaster. I was just there for my book. People are still showing me their rashes on their skin. People are still getting dirty water in many parts of the city. Cancer is surging. Cancer is surging throughout Flint. You got people dying of kidney failure, liver, because lead, it takes many years. It gets worse over the years. And it's not just lead. The media only focused on lead. You had bacteria in the water. Like I said, 100 years in that river of General Motors waste, Dow Chemical, DuPont. So who knows everything that was in that water. The EPA only tested for lead and copper. And as part of my reporting, I showed they covered it up. They manipulated the water testing, so they cheated on the testing too. So it's to me, and I've covered a lot of dirty government. I have never seen a cover up like this. And you could only cover this up if the media allows it, because the media was too busy covering Trump, Russia, porn stars, and all the other nonsense.
You know, speaking of that, Rahm Emanuel, do you remember at the time Rahm Emanuel was mayor of Chicago? And when he heard about the Flint, Michigan thing, he says, well, I'm going to test the water in Chicago. And it comes back that the water was laced with lead. Like, it was like just horrible. And Rahm Emanuel covered it up. He basically covered it up. He tried to hide it. Rahm Emanuel today, I have no idea where he is, but they are trying to bring him back to lead and run the DNC. They want him to be the DNC chair, Rahm Emanuel. And their argument is that, well, the left has taken over the party and Kamala Harris lost because she went too far left. And keep in mind, what they're calling the left is woke stuff, like transgender bathrooms. That's what they're effectively calling the left. And because she went too far left, she lost. So we need to bring back somebody who's more of a centrist. And Rahm Emanuel is our guy. And it's like, so you're bringing back the guy that hid the fact that there was lead all throughout the water in Chicago to lead.
Don't forget that he covered up the murder of a 16-year-old black kid, Laquan McDonald.
Oh, thank you. That too. That's the guy that they want to run the DNC. Well, what do you like? They seem to think that this is a messaging issue. This is not a messaging issue. There's something fundamentally wrong with the way that the party is operated and is operating that is alienating the overwhelming majority of the American public to the point that they can't beat somebody who they call a felon, a sexual abuser, somebody who they call a Nazi and a Hitler. I mean, they use all these terms, and yet they lost. A guy who literally tried to overthrow the government of the United States, and they lost. What is it, from your point of view, that they're getting wrong in all of this?
I don't know when you started tuning into politics. I was around like 2004. And I've been hearing every time Democrats lose that it's a messaging problem, not the policy. It's just the messaging. Well,
they always say it.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I mean, you don't have to be an expert just to read the exit polls. I hate to borrow from James Carville. Is the economy stupid? And the economy, not just the short-term inflation. I mean, I've been covering politics, and I covered 2016, 2020, and 2024. I mean, the neoliberal bubble has rained hell on the particular swath of America that Democrats need to win. And that would be the Midwest. They need those Midwest states to win. I mean, there's ghost towns all over the Midwest of communities that have been decimated by these trade deals and this and that. And Trump seized on that and on 2016. I don't really think he has the policies to actually reverse it. I think he's a lot of talk and fake populism. And you see that across the country, kind of phony populists, seizing on this messaging. And Rahm Emanuel and the Democrats kind of should be reminded Biden barely won in 2020, even though, supposedly the economy was better. So I think that at the root of it is you can't keep telling people, dust off that old record every election. This is the most important election of our lifetime. This opponent is a threat. I mean, they were calling Mitt Romney a grave threat. And people hold their nose to vote for you, but things keep getting worse.
Right.
So
Bob Dole. They call Bob Dole the worst.
right,
threat.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Please.
So at the end of the day, I think it kind of rings hollow to people, and most people that vote tune in maybe a week or two before the election. They're not watching YouTube political shows. Half of them don't even know when the election is. I mean, when I've covered primaries, most people don't even know there is a primary or who their congressperson is. Not because people are stupid. They're just busy and not into this stuff. So most people just said, prices were lower under him. Yeah, I don't like the guy, but costs were lower, this and that. So the policies are the problem. And at the end of the day, Republicans, they don't care about the law or the parliamentarian or whatever other excuse the Democrats make for why they can't do anything. And Biden, as I've said on my channel, Biden could have done things on inflation. I mean, the oil companies were clearly price gouging. His response was, let me send harshly worded letters to the oil CEOs. No, what he could have done is say, hey, we're giving you $15 billion, held a press conference, held a speech, held a rally. We're giving you $15 billion in free subsidies every year. You don't lower the prices, we're pulling it by the end of the week. People like a fighter on the left and the right. He's not going to do that because Wall Street is the biggest investor in the fossil fuel industry, and Wall Street donates to Biden and the Democratic Party. But that's what JFK did in 1962, before the CIA got him. JFK, U.S. Steel was price gouging steel. And he said, okay, I'm going to give the contracts for these submarines to other steel companies that aren't price gouging. U.S. Steel buckled. So there were things he could have done on inflation, but the Democrats under neoliberalism, there's a conflict of interest when the cookie jar is being filled by the same industries you're supposed to be regulating. So I don't think Rahm Emanuel is going to save this. And I actually don't think it's as bad as people think. I mean, there's a lot of hot takes out there that Trump is permanently realigned. No, I mean, at the end of the day, he only won Wisconsin, I think, by 30,000 votes, Michigan by 80,000, Pennsylvania, more than that. But yeah. I mean, politics is fluid. It can switch back. But I do think there is an opening, honestly, in America for a third party if people would get their act together, because everybody wants a third party, but they have no plan for how to actually deal with the obstacles, which are the media. You need to raise a hell of a lot of money because the Democrats and the Republicans are going to flood you with an army of lawyers to kick you off the ballot. I think there's an appetite for independents, third parties, but you have to be prepared for it. But Rahm Emanuel, you're not one Rahm Emanuel away from taking back power and just proposing more tax credits and, buzzwords like the opportunity economy. I don't even think Obama, frankly, with all his, oratory skills, I don't even think Obama would have beat Trump right now.
You don't? Right now. Do you think he would have beat him in 2016?
2016.
I think he would have won in 2016.
Yes, 2016, I do.
Term. Yeah.
Hillary was a uniquely bad candidate. I don't think Obama would have beat Trump at the margins. He beat McCain. And I think he would have narrowly won. But honestly, I think without COVID and Trump's horrendous management of it, I think Trump would have beat Biden. And so I think at the end of the day, if you go to a restaurant and the side dishes are nice, but like the main meal is undercooked, it doesn't matter how many times you tweak the side dishes. Agreed. If the main meal is rotten, people are going to stop going to the restaurant, and that's the Democratic Party.
What do you think they need? What is the change that they need? I mean, look, people on the left have a certain assessment in regards to believing that Social Security, education, increased minimum wage, like those type of things are the things that the American public needs and would vote for. The Democratic Party doesn't think that. I mean, and they think they conflate being a lefty with social stuff as opposed to the economic stuff. And I get why they do that. I mean, they have to raise money and they don't necessarily want to go to a rich person and say, hey, I'm going to increase the minimum wage. They're going to get kicked out. But what is that change that they fundamentally need? Sanders flirted in one of his posts after the election saying that the Democratic Party lost the working class, so the working class didn't show up to vote. Do you think that's true?
Absolutely. And I think the Democratic Party, honestly, and this isn't just Democratic Party, Republican Party too, but they're certainly not going to take this lesson. I think they need to learn a valuable lesson, which is you don't need to sell the government to corporations to compete in politics. Bernie Sanders, I'm not thrilled with the last 4 years of what he's been up to, but he proved you can compete if you actually stand for something. You can raise, I think he raised $250 million in 2016. You could compete. Donald Trump was outspent by Hillary Clinton 2-1. He won. Donald Trump, I don't know the margins, but he was definitely outspent against Harris. He won. He had no ground game. His ground game was Elon Musk and putting volunteers in U-Haul trucks. I don't know if you heard about that. There was no ground game. Of course, they had super PACs and they had money, but they had big money. But Trump was outspent. I mean, Harris raised $1 billion in like 3 months.
I'm sorry, she raised $1.5 billion. Donald Trump raised $400 million in that race.
Right.
Like he's
So,
like 3-1.
What if you try this experiment, right? And you just propose popular things that working people might give you money, and you compete on the policies and see if you win. Yeah. I think, I could be wrong, I think, based on the polls, that running on universal health care has support across the board. Even Republicans, it's like 50%. Yeah. What if you actually challenge the media? Bernie only kind of went off sort of to that line, but what if you call out the media on their propaganda?
Yeah.
What if you call out the media? You're talking about how lovely private insurance is, but isn't it kind of a conflict of interest since Big Pharma, advertises on your station? And honestly, that's becoming less and less important because CNN, MSNBC, their ratings are dramatically going down right now, and alternative outlets and podcasts are rising. So to me, listen, you can't unravel the corrupt government in overnight. The flag behind me is not for effect. We live in the United Corporations of America, but there are bold policies. Bernie, love him or hate him, I can't tell you how many Republicans, Trump supporters, told me he was their second option beyond Trump.
Yes. You remember when Sanders went on Fox News and rocked it. I mean, just, goes into the lion's den, and Fox is shocked that their audience was applauding. Yeah, we like this guy.
They were raising their hand for, they wanted government healthcare. So the policies, it's not rocket science. What policies to run on are there. They're not going to run on it because they're still living in this. You can't really teach these old corporate dogs new tricks. They're still living in this bubble that you got to outraise the candidate. You need to, dial for dollars, this and that. But of course you need to raise bigger money. But I mean, Bernie showed you can compete. And I think part of that also is if you, whether it's Bernie or name someone else, if you are running against corruption, if you're running for bold policies, not only are you then galvanizing the troops to give you, small dollar money, but then you're galvanizing, groups outside. I mean, I don't know what they're doing now, but previous days, the Justice Democrats and things like that, then you're galvanizing them. People, contribute to them. So there is money in politics to run a competent campaign. You don't need to pay consultants, $150,000 a month to tell you, bullshit. And people might say this is naive, but I don't think so. Bernie, he widely overperformed in 2016, and he was very close in 2020 if Obama didn't get involved to basically stack the deck against him at the last minute. You don't need super PACs and all the corporate money. You need to run on bold policies, not this means-tested, mealy-mouthed bullshit. And I would argue, in addition to failing to do anything about inflation, part of why Biden and then Harris lost, Biden ran on very few things, but he ran on a $15 minimum wage, right? He gets in there. They do this COVID relief bill, and he unilaterally surrenders. He says the parliamentarian won't let us do it. Okay, well, that's nonsense. But let's say he said we're going to ignore the parliamentarian. Yeah. Then let's say, all right, well, Joe Manchin and a couple Democratic senators wouldn't do it. Well, you're the president. Go around the country and shame these motherfuckers. Go to West Virginia and hold a rally on his doorstep. Oh, but Jordan, then Manchin might get pissed and go to the Republican Party and give the Republicans control of the Senate, as opposed to blocking everything you want to do as a Democrat.
Right.
I mean, it's so we've kind of forgotten, like, they don't want to use the bully pulpit of the presidency. I mean, Obama, after 22 or however many school kids were murdered in Sandy Hook, he held a press conference, cried, I think it was genuine, and did nothing. Put up his hands. Well, I can't do anything. Well, you have some of the best oratory skills of any politician of the last century. Go around the country and shame these motherfuckers. So I just think there's a lot of excuses, pretzel twisting rationalizations for why we can't do anything. People like a fighter. So even if Biden went around and shamed these people, but Manchin still wouldn't have done it, you do get points for that. And Harris, I mean, I remember I did a 3-state swing state reporting trip before the election this time. I was in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. She had billboards across the highway. Kamala Harris supports raising the minimum wage.
She never said anything.
But to what number? To what number? It wasn't on the billboard. Did they not have enough space? There were billboards. Kamala Harris supports Social Security. Okay, you got me. I mean, it's just all poll tested bullshit. Nobody, she had certain policies she were running on, but she didn't have an overarching theme.
Right.
So nobody knew what she stood for. And that's the problem. And fill in the blank. I mean, it's probably going to be Gavin Newsom, Pete Buttigieg, one of these corporate shills. They're not going to run on any, unless something radically changes, they're not running on the policies we're talking about. Yeah. They're not running on, hey, let's cut the military budget by 40% because it's wasteful. They can't even pass an audit. And let's give that money here. They'd be assassinated. So there you go.
Jordan Sheridan, journalist. Man, thank you for this. Check Jordan out on Status Quo. Are you on Twitter, Jordan? What's your Twitter?
Yeah, I'm on what's left of Twitter at Jordan Sheridan. I'm on Blue Sky, the new one. I don't know what my name is there, but if you type me in, I guess you'll find me. And Status Quo is on Twitter and Blue Sky. And subscribe to Status Quo. We're one of the only independent outlets actually on the ground, routinely covering corporate sacrifice zones. We're still on Flint. We're still on East Palestine, where Norfolk Southern blew up 5 train cars of toxic chemicals last year, and everyone's sick, but the government's covering it up. So we're still on the stories that you don't see in mainstream media. And check us out at Status Quo.
Man, thank you for this. It's really good to catch up with you, man. I really do appreciate it. I remember when you started, actually. So no, it's nice to catch up. Thank you for this.
Absolutely, man.
All right, let's go to our next guest, the one and only Mark Frost. What's going on, my man? How you doing, Mark?
Greetings. It's cold here in Georgia.
It is freezing here also. I was
like
out
20 degrees. I know probably to you that's like nothing, but it was cold. It's below freezing here.
Look, I'll tell you this. It was like it felt like it was going to snow. Like it was that bad. Like bone-chillingly cold. So, man, I thank you for joining me. Economist, professor, consultant, drummer, Eagle Scout, Marine, capitalist, Schumpeterian, and recovering libertarian. I can't believe I know that by heart at this point. No, it's great to have you, man. You mentioned about Donald Trump, and I saw when he did this, and I didn't necessarily do a show on it, so I thought it'd be great to talk about it. Donald Trump threatened BRICS countries. Now, this is fascinating on so many levels, because in one sense, the Democratic Party never even acknowledged that BRICS exists. Like, I've never heard them even whisper the word. Maybe they whisper it, in mumble tones to one another in meetings or whatever. But they never really said anything about it. I remember on the campaign trail, Donald Trump mentioned sanctions, and he talked about how sanctions were damaging the dollar and saying basically, we need to get rid of sanctions on Russia because it's damaging our relationship and damaging the dollar, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Which is one of the first few times that I heard somebody actually mention, hey, this isn't helping us. This is actually hurting us. Then I heard him mention, I think he wrote a post about it or something like that, effectively saying he's going to sanction the countries that try to de-dollarize. So it's like, use my product or else, Who the hell does that? How do you force somebody to use your dollar? And if you need to do that, haven't you missed the thread? And so he seems to be functioning from this kind of hubristic belief that America is in position to even do this, which I don't buy the premise that America is in a position to do. I would go further. The very act that we've used sanctions and everything else, Donald Trump was right the first time around, has caused these countries to do exactly what they're doing in trying to find a way to mitigate the dollar as a weapon and as a potential to damage their economies and their countries in the way that we use them. Give me your take on this. This is going to speed de-dollarization, not slow it down. Or do you disagree with that?
No, I absolutely agree with it. And the sad thing about the whole thing, maybe the word isn't even sad. Maybe the word is silly. The silly thing about this, the entire BRICS concept, is the concept of BRICS is silly. You have this so-called collection of nations that don't necessarily like each other, China, India, but they're united in one big giant international sort of annoyance, which basically is that, okay, we can't keep using the US dollar as a reserve currency if they're going to stop it from being a medium of exchange around the world.
Exactly.
You can't have you can't have all the three-letter agencies waging war using the dollar. So you have the Drug Enforcement Agency that's, wanting to stop, international movement of dollars. And then you have the Ukraine thing. And then you have, every time something happens, it seems like now the new warfare is, let's use the Treasury Department and the Fed and every other agency that we have that has anything to do with US dollars, and let's do everything we can to make the dollar as a unit of account, a medium of exchange when it comes to international commerce, let's make that less attractive to people that are using it.
Right.
Because nobody wants the dollar meltdown to happen. I mean, literally no one, not even one person. They don't want it. We don't want it because you had me on a while back where we kind of ran out of time, and I said, so you asked what would happen if the dollar ever lost its
if they lost the reserve currency.
And I said something like it would be akin to a nuclear war in the economic sense. It would be devastating. And I'm one of the few guests that you have that don't want to be contacted. I don't have, I'm not selling any books. I don't have a podcast. I don't, so people have to work to track me down. And, you're a new podcast and you don't have Joe Rogan numbers, but 5 people tracked me down and wanted to know, well, what do you mean by that? So, so maybe it might be worth taking maybe a couple of minutes and I'll just talk.
Yeah, please. I mean,
about,
that's a big
what
issue,
it is,
right?
why it came to be and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And the U.S., since Bretton Woods, which was the foundational monetary New World Order after World War II, because people forget that right after World War II, I mean, very few places on the earth were untouched by that, and virtually no industrialized country, except maybe Switzerland and a handful of others. But if you basically, if you wanted to buy a washing machine, you probably had to buy it from an American company. If you wanted to buy a car, so General Motors exported its crappy cars all over the world, and things like that, and it produced a level of hubris. And the Bretton Woods treaty basically started the IMF. It set the U.S. dollar as the new gold standard for international commerce between nations. And so the balance of payments, as economists call it, where each nation has its gold supply at the New York Fed, debited and credited and all that kind of stuff, based upon whether it's able to repay its debt obligations and all that sort of a thing. So everybody was happy. Even people that hated us used the dollar because it was the best choice that you had at that time to make international payments, because volatility creates havoc in international exchange. Just kind of think about it. Let's say you are a German company and you you're manufacturing something with a 20% margin, and then the euro tanks by 20%. Well, everything you've produced for free. And if it takes more, then you've actually produced it at a loss, even though you haven't done anything wrong. Your productivity is still high, all of that stuff. It's just the nature of that. And so Bretton Woods stabilized the international monetary system. And for the vast majority of the time, presidents understood you don't mess with the secret sauce. We might hate this country, but we're not going to toxify US dollars, because 70% of the demand for them is outside of American commerce. There's more dollars outside the United States than there are inside. And if let's just say we woke up tomorrow morning and the BRICS conspiracy, if you will, took place, and no international contracts anymore are denominated in dollars. And so the demand for dollars plummets by 70%. That would set off a wave of not just inflation, but hyperinflation. It would start in the United States. And as the saying goes, if the United States sneezes, the world catches a cold. And it would literally decimate every economic market, every financial market. Investment capital would dry up. And you would have a situation that's not that dissimilar from, say, what happened to the dollarization after the Brazil currency just imploded. That's a great monetary example. We monetary economists have studied that ad nauseum. How can you go from having a relatively stable currency to, within just a couple years, it's cheaper to use $1 billion Zimbabwe note as toilet paper than to buy toilet paper? That's the nightmare. Because if the world stops buying dollars, that means they literally also have stopped buying U.S. Treasury bonds. If they stop buying U.S. Treasury bonds, then for the U.S. to service its debt, which is now, I believe, it just hit the number 3. I believe it's number 3 on the budget right now. It was 4, and it's probably going to be number 2 by the end of next year, which means that if we have to lower the price of our bonds to get people to buy them, well, there's an inverse relationship between the yield of a bond and the price you pay for it. So if the Treasury Department has to lower its price to sell because they have a bunch of bonds on the shelf and they have to fund the government, then they have to lower the price. If you lower the price, you increase interest rates. You increase the net interest rate that the United States pays. And if 70% of the demand for dollars dries up, what you're going to end up having is a nightmare situation where dollars themselves have just plummeted. The Treasury Department is forced to pay ridiculous, probably double, triple digit interest rates if this happened. And so let's just say it goes up to 100%. Well, what we do know from monetary history is once a nation starts down this road, they never, and when I say never, I mean they never recover. They keep printing money because they get addicted to it.
Yeah.
If people stop buying our bonds, we have to lower that price, which increases our net rate of, it increases the yield from the perspective of an investor, but it increases our interest expense. So now interest becomes the number one thing on the budget. And so that starts crowding out investment. It starts crowding out people's 401ks. And what you have is a top-heavy system that just starts to implode on itself. And the only way out of it is just to keep printing money until you've evaporated your debt. And now you're in austerity. You're subjugated by the IMF and the nations that are going to come in and try to bail you out. I'm not even sure the United States might be too big to bail out.
Yeah.
And I guess you could argue it's too big to fail. Even China wouldn't want BRICS to happen overnight.
Well, let me ask you
even
this.
though they say they do, they don't, because it would it would drop the GDP of the entire world precipitously. There's no getting around that.
So just to nail it down, just so everybody knows what we're talking about. The amount of money that we pay on interest right now is nearly the amount that we pay for the military budget. It's about $600 billion. I'm sorry.
I think it actually exceeded
the military
the last fiscal quarter where we measured it. I believe it exceeded military. So I think it's number 3 now.
$1 trillion a year that we're paying just to service the debt.
Exactly.
That
so
is
it's like it. So I bet every listener here, at least, you know, unless they're real young, has had a bad experience in their life. They did something stupid. They started living on credit cards, and they do you get 12 months, 12 months free. And then you read the fine print, you have to pay it retroactively if you go more than 2 months and all, more than 1 year and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what we've done. And we've been able to do it because the dollar is so stable, because no matter what we do, the world keeps the dollar at a stable sort of a thing, rather than just the volatility that most nations' currencies go through. So we get this giant benefit from this post-World War II monetary economic order.
Mm-hmm.
But that comes with responsibility. And the responsibility of that is you have to keep the currency that is the reserve currency as a liquid, transactionable currency. If you start putting every condition on it, if you start penalizing people that hold it, if you seize it just because the government, you can be traveling in an airport with $20,000. You might have every legitimate reason to have cash. When I go overseas, I like to have lots of US cash with me.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a variety of reasons to have cash. But if customs sees that, you don't have any real due process. They can just take it and say, we think this might be a form of illegal activity. And now you have to sue them to get your money back. And for a lot of people, the money, it costs more to sue them than the money is worth.
Yeah.
So yes, you're exactly right. The problem is if the largest portion of your budget is interest, think of the opportunity cost of that. You're not building roads. You're not educating children. You're not investing in research and development. You're literally paying a debt service. And 40 years ago, that was fine because Americans owed mostly themselves their money. Well, globalization has changed all of that. The vast majority of US debt, the bonds that we've issued, are held by foreign entities. China, Russia, India, governments, central banks hold US Treasury dollars. And of course, private international firms own US investment dollars. And if that dries up, it's literally it's an apocalyptic nightmare scenario is what it is. I mean, I think it would be better almost if you abstracted away the value of life. There would probably be less damage by a nuclear exchange than there would be in what would happen to the world if this happened.
Like a financial meltdown.
China and India and Brazil and South Africa and all these other countries know this. So from their perspective, we're not being responsible. We're like, okay, you're the boss, you're in charge, you're the reserve currency, and that gives a responsibility on you. You are to provide a non-volatile transactional currency that can actually be used, not something that you seize on a whim, not something that you use as a tool of war. Because once you start doing that, people say, you know what? The US dollar used to be a safe haven. It's not so safe anymore. If you say something they don't like, if you do something that is out of line with what they think you ought to be doing, you're going to pay a giant price for it. And you might pay a price that you can't even afford. And so this is the problem.
Well, and just to be clear on the other point, it's one thing if we are making debt in the US dollars. Well, we can pay anything for US dollars, right? The US can print whatever it wants in that case. At the point where you owe China or you owe India or you owe some other country, okay, well, at that point, it's in their currency. Is that right? Like, am I getting that right?
No, it's not. No, all of our debt is in US dollars. And that's what happens. That's why countries go. So countries that are experiencing moderate inflation have two choices. They can tighten their monetary policy and make money more scarce, which will have more unemployment, or they can keep it the same and have the inflation rate basically remain the same, or they can say, you know what, we've gone this far. It's almost like a person that has charged up their credit card. They know they're going to end up having to file bankruptcy sooner or later. And they're like, you know what, let's just have 6 months and have a party. And so that's the problem. So our debt to China is measured in US dollars. It's literally US Treasury bills and bonds that they hold. And that's the problem, because money in one word is debt. It's a liability with respect to the federal government. So if you look at the dollars the Fed has outstanding, that's a liability on the Fed's balance sheet. It's not an asset. And so we've been printing our way into prosperity for a very, very long time. And we've been printing money to do dumb things. So for instance, a great example is, I don't know exactly what we've given to Ukraine, but just in what I've read in the newspapers,
$300 billion.
And now let's look at value in kind that still has to be bought. And money is fungible. So if the United States buys a pencil, they're financing that pencil. Think about it. If we send money to Ukraine, if we buy trucks and send them to Ukraine, we're buying those trucks with printed paper.
Oh, credit, right.
Yes.
Right.
Well, that in one word, that's what money is. It's debt. So on the Treasury side, maybe to just have a little tangent, there's an interesting kind of barroom conversation that used to be popular, and it was called the platinum coin option. You know, Congress could pass a law and say, what is our debt right now? I think it's about
$36 trillion, something like that.
37 trillion last time I looked. So Congress could just pass a law tomorrow and says,
$1 trillion coin.
We're going to coin. It doesn't even have to be platinum. It could be anything. We're going to make a wooden coin out of wood. We're going to stamp Donald Trump's face on it, and we're going to declare it legal tender, and it's worth $37 trillion.
Right.
Well, okay. It's legal tender. The Federal Reserve must take it. That's what legal tender means. They must take it as a deposit. So the Fed will credit the government's account with $37 trillion, and it will debit liabilities of $37 trillion. And so you probably don't have to be an economist to know what would happen after that. There would be inflation. There'd be quadruple digit inflation in the United States that would lead up to a hyperinflationary situation, and the entire country would melt down. And the only thing that has stopped this from happening to us in the past is the privilege that we have after World War II via Bretton Woods agreements that makes the US dollar basically the world's monetary standard. And ordinarily, I would say BRICS is a stupid idea. It won't work. It's silly. The member countries don't have enough in common for it to all work. But even I didn't anticipate either the stupidity or the negligence that our leaders, especially our financial leaders, have chosen in this thing. It's unbelievable to me.
You're not alone in thinking it wouldn't work. Joe Biden, if you remember, was deriding the leaders of these countries at one point, saying, well, you guys getting together? Sure you are. And eventually they said, okay. And if you notice, though, they've decided from their point of view that peace is in their best interest. So China and India have tried to put down their issues to the side. China has worked with Saudi Arabia and Iran to put their issues to the side. So all of these countries that were at each other's throats in some way have started to to bring down the hostilities with each other as a way of saying, this is in our best interests. This is in our financial interests. So this is what we're going to do as countries. Personally, I love it because at the very least, they're looking at the world in a less hostile way. And it's less hostile for their own self-interest. Now, if it was a situation where the U.S. imploded and they no longer had this kind of boogeyman that they're positioning against, who knows? But they have argued that they want a multipolar world and that they want to deal with each other as equals. Like they have all of this stuff that's kind of built into it. And the U.S. is taking this stuff as, okay, this is a threat to our hegemonic control of the globe and we need to do something about it. And that's what Trump is responding to. Trump is looking at this in the sense of, okay, that's a problem for us. We need to do something about that. In fact, I was listening to this guy give this fascinating conversation where he was talking about how because of BRICS and because of them trying to use their own currencies when they're dealing with trade and everything else, that we don't even know what is being traded per se. Like he was talking about how I think it was like a grain shipment that China was getting from like the US or somewhere. They canceled the shipment. And they was like, okay, they clearly got it from somewhere, but we have no clarity on where they got it from because they're using this kind of alternate system now that we don't have access to, and we're completely unaware, meaning we're in the black. They clearly got massive amounts of grain from somewhere. And it was like, maybe they got it from Brazil, maybe they got it from some other country. But the reality of it is that is going to get more, meaning there's going to be more and more of that being done where the dollar is left out in the cold. I was fascinated by that conversation because it's kind of what Trump is pointing at. It's like, all right, if they're not going to use the dollar, then who is? And as you pointed out, 70% of the dollar is outside of the country. Okay, well, what happens to the U.S. economy and everything else if indeed that becomes a norm where they're trading in their own currencies and they decide to just not use that 70% of the dollars? I would imagine it has to come back here, which we don't have capability of disposing of, not that much money. I mean,
well, that's what I mean by the nuclear nuclear comparison, because the nightmare scenario is this doesn't happen by accident or even evolution. The BRICS countries get in a smoke-filled room and they plan a strategy to have the maximum impact on the United States. So just like nuclear war, no two rational countries want to fight a nuclear war.
No, of course not.
Maybe rational is the wrong word, because rational does sane, even crazy people can be rational. Let's call it no sane people, no sane leaders want to say, you know what, I'm feeling good this morning. Let's go have nuclear war with Russia.
Right.
I don't. You have to be so neocon in your thinking that you've lost the ability to even gauge reality. But that's the nightmare scenario. So it isn't that they stop using the dollar in exchange. They dump the dollar. They're not. Think about it. Dollars, if you're not going to spend them, are just pieces of paper. Or in modern times, they're just digital currencies, right? Because most money is not even in fiat paper.
Things on the keyboard, yeah.
Right. And so they're not going to hold them because they know a priori that the price of the dollar is going to fall. They're going to dump those dollars even before they announce their new BRICS currency, and you can use this instead. So it would be sort of a preemptive first strike from a monetary warfare perspective. And we're making ourselves vulnerable by the stupidity of how we're managing our monetary policy. We've tried to use it on the war on drugs. It's failed. We're trying to use it on the war I'm going to call it what it is. It's a silent war on Russia. It's not an actual war yet, but it's, for all practical purposes, we're waging war against Russia.
Right.
And then when you look at all of these things, Latin America, well, drugs. Well, the reason that they even supply the drugs is there's this giant sucking sound of demand from Americans who want their cocaine, they want their fentanyl, they want this, they want that. And yet we blame them. And I think you said something earlier that makes a lot of sense to me. whether you're a person or a country, most people can deal with you if you don't act so smug that you believe you're superior to them in every way.
Yes.
You and I
Yes.
can't be friends if one of us just thinks the other one is down here and then the other one's up here. We cannot be friends.
How do I engage you in that situation, right? Where you're like, I'm indispensable and you're something else. How does that work? Who accepts that premise, right?
Well, I think the neocons do. I think, you know, there's a difference between being proud of your country, for feeling fortunate to have been born in a place where there's general freedom, blah, 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 blah. There's a difference in that to believing every cultural difference in the world, every deviation around from American culture is somehow evil. And, you know, I've traveled a lot and I've seen that stereotypical, you know, dumbass American that, oh, these people drive on the wrong side of the road. Well, it's not the wrong side of the road. It's a different side of the road.
Right.
And that attitude, just kind of at the street level, when it migrates up into this neocon mindset, it's the entire world needs to value exactly what we value. And if they value it in any different way, then they're inferior. And if you could just become Americans, you'd be so happy. And a lot of people in the world look up to America, but they don't want to necessarily be us. They want to pick and choose pieces that they like and pieces that they don't. Right. A great example is Indonesia. They don't have religious freedom there and they don't want it. If you say something heretical about Jesus Christ, you're going to get arrested there. Same way with Muhammad, you know, peace be with both of them.
Yeah.
You know, seriously, and you can't have a reserve currency if you do everything you can to toxify it, because these countries don't want BRICS. The BRICS countries don't want this. This is a little bit of game theory where they're saber rattling and they're like, okay, if you keep going down this route, you're leaving us no choice but to dump the US dollar. And anyone that studies this stuff knows if it was a concerted, organized policy that worked, it would devastate the United States. But here's the problem. It would devastate them too.
Well, I kind of disagree with that. It's not that I don't think they
would, because we are still the largest demanders of goods and services in the world.
No, I agree with that part. It's the part that they don't want BRICS. I think they want some edifice. I don't think they want this notion of having to pick and choose. Like, I don't think they want to have to, it's either the US or BRICS. I think they want to be able to just deal with trade for everybbe.
Well, that's not going to happen because there's always going to be a monetary standard. Back in the 19th century, it was pound sterling and then literally physical gold. I mean, there is an argument. There is some substance to the theory of hegemonic stability. You're in an anarchy of nations. There is no federation of planets. There is no Earth dome. There is no Earth government. And so in an anarchy of nations, one nation is the 800-pound gorilla that leads. Right. Well, my problem and what makes BRICS now a feasible thing instead of a silly, let's go get high and talk monetary theory type thing, something like that. What has made it plausible now is our own actions. We have, from a foreign investor's perspective, we have toxified the US dollar. And that didn't used to be that way. Even in the height of the Cold War, we never froze Russian assets. Cuban Missile Crisis, we did not freeze Russian assets. When they invaded Afghanistan, we did not freeze Russian assets. We did not do that because everybody understood that we had a responsibility, which comes with the privilege
Mark, last question. What changed?
Of all this?
I guess last question. What changed? Like, meaning, how did they go from, okay, we have a responsibility. We want to keep the dollar lucid and fluid. We want people to use it. We don't want to use it as a weapon because if we use it as a weapon, people are going to try to mitigate the fact that we're using it as a weapon. To, we can totally use the dollar as a weapon. We can totally steal money from Russia. We can totally steal gold from Venezuela. When, like, what was the thinking in that switch where they said to themselves, this is a great idea? There'd be no consequences from us.
I think I can tell you, I think I can give you a date. August 1st, 1972. It's when Nixon took us off the international
gold standard. Yeah.
That allowed us, because you got to remember, every nation in the world, including China, pegged their currency to the US dollar. And so when we started inflationary spending for two reasons, the Vietnam War, because they knew the Americans wouldn't go for it if Johnson would have went on TV and said, my fellow Americans, we need to do this and we're going to raise taxes so we can afford it. That war of popularity would have just plummeted, right?
But they should do that.
Same as Iraq. I mean, this is why we don't declare war anymore. We have these little things. And so because they're not really fighting a war, you know, they're using monetary tricks and things like that. But to ask me when it began, I mean, I think that would be a good date.
Well, there's a consciousness change somewhere in the political leadership.
Another place where, I mean, and starting August 1st, 1972, what you find is just a natural evolution. Maybe we could call it the age of the neocon. Yeah. And, you know, I used to associate neocons with Republicans, and I think that was a mistake of mine. It might have even been a mistake then, because Hillary Clinton's not young. Hillary Clinton's more neocon than the neocons. I mean,
and Lyndon Baines Johnson took us into Vietnam.
Exactly.
You know, if you look at Obama overthrew the government of Ukraine, like they do it for different reasons, according to them, right? Humanitarian bombs.
Oh, of course. We're dropping bombs on Vietnam because it's humanitarian.
Yeah.
You know, forget that South Vietnam was one of the most corrupt governments. You know, to me, matter of fact, history repeats itself. South Vietnam, from a corruption perspective, is Ukraine today. They're just corrupt.
Mark, man, I always appreciate you, man. I like that fascinating. I guess lesson on monetary policy and what to expect on this stuff. Because you're right. Like, you know, we are the reserve currency, and we did start messing around with it, thinking to ourselves. I think at some point we got into the mindset of that, you know, everything is like we're little Fukuyamas, that this is the end of history.
Yes, exactly.
The Soviet Union has been beaten. We're chest stomping. We feel great about ourselves. So we believe we can do anything. It's like when Joe Biden said, well, we're America. We can do whatever we want. And it's like, no, and I'll end it on this. I remember what I used to be a monster at chess. Oh, I used to be a monster. I third best in the state of Virginia in regards to winning the tournament. Wow. In Blitz, I used to play up to the level of a master, if not stronger. I was a monster. And then I stopped playing. And, you know, you still think to yourself, well, I'm still that monster. I'm still that guy, right? I still can go in and just crush somebody.
Yes.
I go to a tournament, I win the first game, like, yeah, I knew I was still that monster. I get in the second game, third game, fourth game, and lose every last game. And you're sitting there with your wife at the time, like, oh, this is humiliating. Like, this is embarrassing. But what you realize is what I don't think the U.S. has come to realize is that you became a monster because you were studying, you were playing constantly, you were reading books, you were in that life, and you were doing that stuff constantly. You were doing the lessons, the studies that got you to be that person. It wasn't magic. It wasn't like God just endowed you with this capability. You had to work for it. The moment that you stop working for it, that ability goes away. And it's like you get to the 80s, the 90s, missing the things that got you to be the country that you were. I think it's that on some level where they think that the world is still the 1980s, the 1990s, maybe the early 2000s, where Bush can go into Iraq because there's no other country that could ever say it. These days you have China, you have Russia. These are heavy military powers at this point. The stuff that China is doing economically, like building cities, building roads, they're building that stuff in all parts of the world. It's different. It's not the same world. And it doesn't seem like we have fully accommodated the fact that the world has changed.
Well, and our level of hubris has increased. You know, what you're not doing. To use your chess analogy, what you're not doing right now is you're not going up to a grand master who's the it chess man or woman right now and talking a bunch of smack.
Right.
And that's what the U.S. does way too often, in my opinion. We talk too much smack. Now, do I think the Trump administration is the Messiah and everything's going to be perfect and we live in a land of milk and honey afterwards? No, but I do think from just the winds, the political winds of what's going on, I do think it was a pivotal moment in U.S. history, because I do believe at least the ideology of a lot of this is going to fizzle away. And I really hope so, because I would like us to get back to the monetary policy we had up till maybe Eisenhower or something like that.
Yeah.
You can't be the reserve currency and then print yourself into oblivion, because the nations that depend on that currency and the companies that depend on that currency. I mean, we have entire derivative markets now that are designed to hedge against international foreign exchange risk. So Chase will sell options basically on the U.S. dollar, and so let's say, so let's say you and I have let's say you're in the Eurozone, and then we have a contract, and we one way to hedge it is to make sure the contract is denominated in your own local currency. But sometimes you don't get the chance to do that. If you're Airbus and you want to sell to American Airlines, maybe their lawyers get in the room and they start arguing, and then they negotiate, and you agree to make that contract denominated in dollars, and that puts Airbus at risk, because if the dollar depreciates, Airbus could make no money on.
I see. They lose money. That's right.
Yes, exactly. And so there's an entire, in fact, physicists and stuff often don't go into physicists. They go into Wall Street and they go into the pricing and the production of these derivative instruments. It's highly mathematical. It's highly probabilistic, and it's a way to hedge, and it's just insurance. So Airbus might say, you know what, we were going to make $1 billion of profit on this. We're going to spend 50 million and we're going to buy some insurance. And then even if the dollar tanks, at least we'll get the money that was due to us as stated in the contract.
Yeah. Wow. Mark Frost, professor, economist, Schumpeterian, recovering libertarian, and easily the friend of the show. Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Man.
Always a pleasure, my friend.
Oh, man. Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right. Mark Frost. I really appreciated that conversation. And look, Mark Frost is right, man. It would be the equivalent of a nuclear blast if indeed that currency status goes away. And the idea that they've started to use that and weaponize it is appalling. I mean, the idea that you steal $300 billion and then you decide we're going to give that $300 billion to a country that they're fighting. It's outrageous. And it doesn't seem like they can necessarily deal with the, let's say, financial consequences of it. I mean, there's a reason that Europe had taken so long to get to that, because many of the people were screaming, this is a bad idea. This is a bad idea. This is going to have economic consequences that are going to go beyond just what you're doing right now. BRICS is one of those economic consequences. And it's a reality. Mark is right on this notion that these countries typically didn't like each other. I mean, keep in mind, part of the idea was to use Russia against China or China against Russia, and never let these two countries come together and merge in the way that they've merged. Now, they have effectively said we're closer than allies, which gets across the oddity and the situation to which we find ourselves. I will begin where I begin. We are at war. It is a global war. It is unacknowledged. It is undeclared, and it is war. Nonetheless, in the old days, these wars used to be fought. And yeah, they're still fought with guns and everything else, but there's a hybrid type war that is now developed where we use proxies, terrorists in Syria, Nazis in Ukraine, these NGOs and whatnot in Georgia to try to overthrow that government, to use it as a second front against Russia. This stuff is not happening willy-nilly. It's not like all of these people just all of a sudden got up one morning and said, you know what? I think I want to, throw a Molotov cocktail at the Georgian cops. It's not that. It's not that. If you give people a blank check of support, then those people feel far more emboldened than what they would have done prior. These liberals are saying that it is democracy to overthrow the Georgian government. It is astonishing. You have European politicians going to Georgia just like they did for Ukraine. You have European politicians saying, well, the Georgia police are being overly aggressive with the protesters. They're just holding lilies. They're holding lilies. God damn it, they're holding lilies. And they're being beat by cops. Okay, well, they're not holding lilies. They're holding Molotov cocktails, and they're throwing those Molotov cocktails at cops. I can show you video after video after video after video. And they look at that stuff and fundamentally ignore it. While simultaneously, Israel is slaughtering people indiscriminately and is using a peace deal made by the U.S. or ceasefire, a pause that was created and negotiated by the U.S. for one of its client states in order to justify the extended killing of Lebanese. It is a war. Our settler colonial state in the heart of the Middle East has decided to go on a killing spree. And we backed it, funded it 70%, if not more, at this point, while also giving political cover as they do it. We are at war. And when I say we, I mean people of conscience, people of goodwill, the people who look at the world and say, well, I don't want governments overthrowing other governments, the people who care about life as something more than these dots on a map in this kind of global chessboard where it's okay to overthrow governments and get all of these people killed because it suits our own geopolitical objectives. There is a group of people who are sociopaths who just so happen run the world, and they feel that that is slipping, and they have become far more dangerous and far more belligerent because they feel that it is slipping. I will be here reporting on the global conflict, reporting on the global war, and I will be a source of trying to figure out what is happening, and we can figure it out together. And I appreciate you guys being here with me as we do it. Let's go into the chats. All chats will be read. That is my promise to the audience. Jabari, VOC Media, Jamal from Connecticut. Mark confirmed that 40% of people in Georgia believe in the Russia hoax. I don't know if it's 40%, but look, in any election that you're thinking of, you may get 30, 40% of people that vote for the opposition. That's just life, right? Like even in the election, think of our elections. You get 48, 52 in the election. That leaves, what, 75 million people voting for Kamala Harris, or 70 million people, 73 million people voting for Kamala Harris. But yeah, it's a country of 300 million, but 72 million people is a lot of people. Even if you get a percentage of that, let's say you get half of that, that's still, what, 35 million people that may believe something that's not true. I mean, even in regards to the Trump election, you had the majority of Trump voters believe that they cheated. Hell, there may be some people in this audience that believe that Biden cheated in that election. Fair enough. That's not necessarily mind-blowing. You also have people who just don't care, who are looking out for their own self-interest or the self-interest of a political organization or of an ideological objective that they want to accomplish. Again, those people, can't negotiate with those people. They have a certain idea of the world. Truth be told, though, 30% of the people that were arrested were from another country. They weren't even Georgian. So also, let's put that in context. Also, if you get media that is pumping out fake data, fake information, Georgia, they went to war with Russia. The party, or the Dream Party, is not necessarily affiliated with Russia at all. They're just sane, and I would imagine they're nationalists and looking out for Georgia's best interests, as opposed to this kind of being used as a proxy to get themselves killed. There's a difference in those things. So yeah, there may be a percentage of the population that believes in whatever the media is putting out. That is just normal. That just means they're human beings. I feel you, man. It's unfortunate, but it is what it is, what it is. Thanks to everyone here this morning. Mama Thomas saying thank you to the audience. I do appreciate all of you. I second her opinion. So Bikes a lot today. Go check out Reddit. My friend got asked to take a pledge saying health insurance executives are good and make a video. What? Your friend got asked to take a pledge saying that health insurance executives are good. I have no words. I have no words. Look, I would tell you this. If you see a video of somebody getting shot to death, literally getting shot to death, and the people, the American public, looks at the video, they see one man pull out a gun and shoot another man. And the audience who watches a murder finds out that it was a health insurance executive. And their response is not outrage. Their response is not tears. The response is not, oh my God, I can't believe that happened. The response is, bravo! Bravo! That should tell you something. Meaning that response should tell you something about the way that the American public regards the healthcare system, what the health executives do and how they make their money, and how they feel that they are treated by those health insurance companies. If you need to tell people to sign a pledge saying, hey, health executives are great, then there's a question to be asked about why does a pledge even exist, right? A nurse doesn't have to say, hey, would you sign a pledge saying nurses are good? Many people like nurses because they take care of people, right? In this case, if the American public is looking at this and coming to an assessment that, hey, we have no issue with you blowing this guy's head off, then that should tell you something about the way that that person was living or the industry that the person was in. So, it's not, I'm not going to, rally people to go shoot health executives. I'm just trying to make a point of saying that if the American public is given an assessment of something that otherwise would be utterly horrific, then that should tell you something about the way that the public is looking at what that person does for a living. Full stop. So there's that. Look, guys, I want to thank all of you for joining me today. We've had a damn good show. I want to keep this boat rolling, so I will be here Monday, 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. Eastern Standard. I want to thank all of the new members of the Thomas family. I see you. You're awesome. Your help keep the show going. I don't know where I'm going to be next month, if I'm being brutally honest with the audience. I am strongly considering moving. There are issues that have come up now that I no longer am working at Fault Lines. And so I need to resolve those issues. Some of those issues resolve around health insurance and the lack thereof. As you know, I have end-stage renal failure. I've had it ever since I was 17, which requires and necessitates treatments each week, several times each week. Without insurance, I am no longer, or at some point, will not be able to get those in the States. And I'm looking at ways of potentially going to another country in order to pay for those out of pocket. I have that choice will have to be made sooner rather than later. That is not going to affect me doing the show. And anywhere I end up, it will be somewhere where I can continue to do the show 7 a.m., 10 a.m., Monday through Friday. So this show is not going to stop. This is going to keep going. If I can find another radio position somewhere in the United States, either way, this keeps going. I have no intention, no plans to stop this show. This is not a Joe Biden lie about pardoning his son and then all of a sudden, pardoning his kid. No, this show is going to keep going. I'm realizing now more than anything else that I do have an objective of trying to get the show snuff, meaning to improve and to continue to improve, continue to be consistent. And my objective is 100,000 subscribers, and to go and keep going with the idea of reaching that number. 40,000 by the end of the year. I would like you to continue. If you dig the content, like it, share it, subscribe to it, and we're going to keep this boat rocking, whether it's here in the States or whether it's somewhere else. So I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, I'm going to say subscribe, and I will see you, knowing me, probably over the weekend, but at worst, Monday morning. Have a phenomenal day, guys. If I don't see you later today, have a good one. Jamal Thomas Morning Show. Yeah, Jamal Thomas Morning.